The whiskey burned down Elias Boone's throat like liquid fire, but it couldn't match the burning in his dreams. Every night for 10 years, the same images haunted him. Apache women screaming as soldiers dragged them from hiding places, children running in terror as cavalry horses trampled their playground, and that little girl, God, that girl with eyes like midnight wells staring at him as he stood frozen rifle in hand, unable to save her family. Elias set the empty glass on the weathered bar with a soft thud. Lantern light caught the amber remnants clinging to the bottom, gleaming like tears. Another, he said, voice like gravel beneath a wagon wheel. Pete, the barkeep at Santa Fe's Broken Spur Saloon, shook his head. Thought you were tracking Frank Holloway, Captain. Man can't track with whiskey eyes. Elias bristled at the title. Not a captain anymore, just Elias. He pushed a coin forward. Another. Pete sighed, pouring a fresh glass. $500 rewards got every gun hand from Texas to California looking for Holloway. What makes you think you'll find him first? Elias didn't answer. Instead, his weathered fingers traced the wanted poster before him. Frank Holloway's illustrated face stared back, hollow-cheeked, narrow-eyed, a professor gone rogue. Wanted for the murder of the Henderson family settlers, whose homestead was found burned to the ground 3 weeks prior. The man had disappeared into the vast expanses of New Mexico territory where law was as scarce as water. He's heading into Apache country, Elias said finally. Others won't follow. And you will. Pete raised an eyebrow. Elias took a long drink, welcoming the burn. I know it better than most. The unspoken truth hung between them. Elias Boone, former Union Army captain, had served under General Carleton during the campaigns against the Apache. He knew their lands because he had helped take them. He knew their tactics because he had fought against them. And he knew their suffering because he had, God help him, contributed to it. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of desert air and 3 men whose spurs announced their arrival before their shadows did. The tallest one, beard, thick as prairie grass, scanned the room until his eyes locked on Elias. Well, I'll be damned, the man drawled. Captain Elias Boone himself. Thought you'd be dead by now. Elias didn't turn. Sergeant Reynolds, wish you were. The man laughed to sound like rocks in a tin can and approached the bar. His companions flanked him, one young and nervous, the other scarred and silent. Boys, this here's the famous Captain Boone. Led the charge at Cañon de Chelly. How many Apache did you send to their maker that day, Captain? Elias's hand tightened around his glass. Not enough to include you, apparently. Reynolds smirked, leaning against the bar. Up close, Elias could smell the trail dust and sweat that clung to the man like a second skin. Heard you're hunting Frank Holloway. Funny coincidence, so are we. Nothing funny about it. Elias finally turned to face him. $500 draws flies. Reynolds' expression hardened. We ain't flies, Captain. We're businessmen. Speaking of business, heard something interesting from a Mexican trader yesterday. Said he saw a man matching Holloway's description trading with some Apache. Elias's interest piqued despite himself. Where near the old mission ruins at Pecos. Trading books and papers for safe passage, apparently. Reynolds lowered his voice. But that ain't the most interesting part. Trader said Holloway had a little Indian girl with him. Apache by the clothes. Something cold settled in Elias's stomach. A child kidnapped. Reynolds shrugged. Maybe, or maybe he's gone native. Wouldn't be the first white man to lose his mind out there. He straightened up. Of course we plan to find out. Leaving at first light. The territory marshal should handle this, Elias said. Marshal's 3 days' ride from here, and that's if he bothers coming at all. Reynolds smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. $500 doesn't wait, Captain. Plus whatever the girl fetches. Elias stood slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding like a blade. What did you say? Reynolds didn't back down. You heard me. Apache girl will fetch a good price from certain establishments in Mexico, or from some collectors. Exotic. You know. The young companion shifted uncomfortably. Sarge, maybe we should... Shut it, Taylor, Reynolds snapped before turning back to Elias. What's it to you anyway? Thought you were done with Indians after Sand Creek. The name hit Elias like a physical blow. Sand Creek, the massacre that had finally broken him. The reason he'd turned in his commission and walked away from everything he knew. The reason those eyes haunted him still. Leave the girl out of it, Elias said, voice deadly quiet. Reynolds laughed. Or what, Captain? You'll read me regulations. Those days are done. The saloon had gone silent, other patrons sensing the storm brewing between the two men. Pete had subtly moved the bottle away from the edge of the bar. I'm telling you as a courtesy, Elias said. The girl isn't part of the bounty. And I'm telling you, Reynolds leaned in closer, that I take what opportunities present themselves. It's a hard world, Captain. Thought you'd learn that lesson. Elias's hand moved with the fluid grace of a man who'd drawn his weapon countless times before. The Colt peacemaker pressed against Reynolds' ribs before the sergeant could blink. Last warning, Elias said softly. Leave the girl alone. Reynolds went still, then slowly raised his hands. Easy now, just talking business. His eyes hardened. But this ain't over, Boone. It is for tonight. Reynolds backed away, gesturing for his companions to follow. At the door he turned. Sand Creek broke you, didn't it made you sign? He spat on the floor. Apaches killed my brother at Bascom. Killed him slow. Remember that when you're feeling sympathetic. The doors swung shut behind them and gradually conversation resumed in the saloon. Elias holstered his weapon, his hand steady despite the rage coursing through him. Pete slid another whiskey across the bar. On the house, thought you might need it. Elias nodded his thanks and drained the glass. I'm leaving tonight. Reynolds won't wait till morning, no matter what he says. You sure about this Boone getting mixed up in Apache business again? Elias stared at the empty glass, seeing reflected in its curved surface the ghosts of a decade past. No, he said honestly. I'm not sure about anything anymore. The desert night embraced Elias like an old lover as he rode out of Santa Fe. The moon hung full and white, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. His horse, a sturdy Mustang named Dust, moved with quiet confidence across terrain they both knew well. Elias traveled light bedroll canteen, jerky ammunition, and a small bundle of supplies wrapped in oilcloth. A lifetime in the saddle had taught him that speed trumped comfort when tracking human prey. And Frank Holloway was indeed prey, though something about this hunt felt wrong. Holloway had been a respected geology professor at the university in Denver before suddenly disappearing 6 months ago. The murder seemed out of character for an academic with no violent history. The child complicated things further. Why would a murderer take a child, and an Apache child at that, a people known for tracking skills that bordered on supernatural? If he'd truly kidnapped her, every warrior for 100 miles would be hunting him. As he rode, Elias's mind drifted to darker memories. Sand Creek. The name still made his stomach churn after all these years. He had not been there for the massacre itself, a small mercy, but had arrived the day after with reinforcements. What he found had changed him forever. Bodies frozen in the snow. Women and children cut down as they fled, some mutilated in ways that haunted his nightmares still. He'd stood amidst the carnage, listening to fellow officers justify the slaughter as necessary as righteous. That night, he'd written his resignation letter by firelight. A week later, he turned in his commission and walked away from the only life he knew. For 10 years, he drifted, taking bounties on men whose crimes were clear-cut murderers, rapists, thieves. Men who deserved what was coming to them. Men whose capture might in some small way balance the scales he'd helped tip. The distant howl of a coyote brought Elias back to the present. He'd been riding for hours following tracks that only experienced eyes could discern in the moonlight. Reynolds and his men had indeed left before him, their trail heading southeast toward Pecos. By dawn, Elias had reached the ruins of the old mission. The stone walls stood like sentinels against the rising sun's shadows, stretching long across the dusty ground. He dismounted, leading Dust to a small stream nearby, and studied the area. Multiple hoof prints marked the earth. Reynolds and his companions had been here, but so had others. Smaller prints, lighter a child perhaps. And unusual boot prints that Elias recognized as the distinctive pattern of Frank Holloway's custom-made boots described in the wanted poster. They had been here no more than a day ago. Elias tethered Dust in the shade and moved through the ruins, carefully rifle ready. The mission's main building stood relatively intact, its thick walls defying both time and weather. Inside the cool darkness was a blessed relief from the mounting heat. Signs of recent occupation were evident, ashes of a small fire, scraps of food, and Elias knelt, pages torn from a book covered with strange symbols and diagrams. He collected the pages, noting the careful handwriting that matched descriptions of Holloway's penmanship. A slight sound, the barest whisper of movement, made Elias freeze. He turned slowly, rifle raised. Come out, he called softly. I won't hurt you. Silence answered him. Then from behind a fallen beam, a small figure emerged. A girl perhaps 13 with dark eyes that reflected no light and skin the color of burnished copper. She wore traditional Apache clothing, though torn and dirty from travel. A rawhide cord around her neck held some kind of stone talisman. Kinalda. Elias tried the name Reynolds had mentioned, his pronunciation clumsy. The girl's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered with recognition. She shook her head slightly. My name is Elias, he said, keeping his voice gentle. He lowered his rifle slowly. I'm looking for a man, Frank Holloway. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the wanted poster, holding it up for her to see. The girl glanced at the image, then back at Elias. She said something in Apache, a language Elias recognized but couldn't speak. I don't understand, he admitted. Hablas español? His Spanish was rudimentary at best. The girl hesitated, then nodded. Pequeño, she said, holding her thumb and forefinger close together. A little. The man in this picture, Elias tried again in halting Spanish. ¿Dónde está? The girl studied him warily, then pointed east. Hombres malos, she said. Bad men. Elias understood immediately. Reynolds had found Holloway. But where was the girl Reynolds had mentioned? Was this a different child? ¿Estás sola? Are you alone? The girl shook her head again more emphatically. Mi hermana, she said. My sister. Then she added something in Apache, pointing east again, with growing distress. Elias pieced together what he could. Reynolds had captured Holloway and presumably this girl's sister. The sister must be the child Reynolds had mentioned. ¿Cómo te llamas? He asked. What's your name, Kinalda? She replied softly. So this was the girl Reynolds had mentioned after all. But if she was here, who had they captured? Before Elias could question her further, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Kinalda's eyes widened with fear. Hombres malos, she whispered, shrinking back. Elias moved to the doorway, peering out cautiously. 5 riders approached from the north, not Reynolds' group, but men Elias didn't recognize. Their manner of dress and the rifles they carried suggested trouble. Hide, Elias told Kinalda, gesturing urgently toward the back of the ruins. The girl disappeared into the shadows as Elias positioned himself beside the doorway, rifle ready. The riders drew closer, dust billowing behind them like smoke. They reined in before the mission, scanning the area with practiced eyes. Their leader, a man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, dismounted. I know you're in there, Holloway, he called. Raymond Locke sent us. Come out now, and maybe we won't kill you right away. Elias remained silent, mind racing. Raymond Locke, the name was familiar. A wealthy landowner in the territory known for his harsh treatment of both workers and natives. But what did he want with Frank Holloway? The scarred man nodded to his companions, who spread out surrounding the building. We know about the girl, too. A valuable little thing, ain't she? A lot of people interested in what she knows. Elias glanced back toward where Kinalda had hidden. What could a child possibly know that would interest men like these? The leader stepped closer to the doorway. Last chance, Holloway, or we start shooting. Decision time. Elias could reveal himself, explain he wasn't Holloway, but then they'd search the ruins and find Kinalda. Or he could fight against 5 men with unknown skills and intentions. The choice was made for him when one of the riders spotted dust tethered nearby. Boss horse back here. Someone's definitely inside. The scarred man raised his rifle. All right then, we do this the hard way. The first shot splintered the wooden doorframe inches from Elias's head. He responded instinctively, years of military training taking over. His first shot caught the leader in the shoulder, spinning him backward. His second dropped one of the flanking men from his saddle. The remaining 3 returned fire bullets, peppering the stone walls. Elias ducked back inside, moving to a window for a better angle. 2 quick shots and another man fell. The last 2 riders retreated to the cover of a low stone wall, calling to their wounded leader. Whoever you are, one shouted, you're dead. Locke doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. Elias didn't respond, conserving breath and focus. The standoff stretched for long minutes, the desert sun climbing higher, baking the stone around them. A soft touch on his arm nearly made Elias jump. Kinalda had crept up beside him, silent as a shadow. Mi hermana, she whispered urgently, pointing east again. Nijoni. Elias understood her concern. If these men were also searching for Holloway and Reynolds already had him, time was running out for her sister. but they couldn't leave while under fire. Suddenly, Canalda touched the stone talisman around her neck, closed her eyes, and began singing softly a melodic chant that raised the hairs on Elias's arms. Outside, the desert wind picked up swirling dust and spinning columns. The clouds that had been distant on the horizon rushed toward them, darkening the sky with unnatural speed. Within minutes, a sandstorm engulfed the ruins, reducing visibility to mere feet. The girl tugged at Elias's sleeve. "Vamos," she said. "Let's go." Elias hesitated only briefly, wondering at what he'd just witnessed. Had the girl somehow summoned the storm impossible? Yet the timing. They slipped out the back of the ruins, Elias leading dust carefully through the blinding sand. The girl moved with surprising confidence, as though the storm affected her less. They had gone perhaps half a mile when the wind died as suddenly as it had risen, leaving them exposed on open ground. But the men at the ruins were nowhere to be seen. Kina Alda looked up at Elias with those fathomless eyes. "Ayúdame," she said simply. "Help me." Elias nodded, understanding flowing between them without words. Whatever strange circumstances had brought them together, they now shared a purpose. Find her sister, find Holloway, and discover what Raymond Locke wanted badly enough to send armed men into Apache territory. "I'll help you," he promised, lifting her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Let's find Najoni." They rode east, following tracks partially obscured by the strange storm. Elias's thoughts tumbled like the sand that still clung to his clothing. What had he gotten himself into? A bounty hunt had somehow become something far more complicated, dragging him back into the world of Apache settler conflicts he'd tried for 10 years to escape. Yet as the small figure sat straight back before him, facing the rising sun, with quiet determination, Elias felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose. Not just the hollow satisfaction of bringing in another bounty, but something deeper. Something that might perhaps begin to balance those scales at last. The tracks led them to a narrow canyon by midday. Elias reined in at the entrance, studying the sheer rock walls that rose on either side. A perfect place for an ambush. Beside him, Canalda had gone tense, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. "¿Qué pasa?" he asked softly. "What's wrong?" She pointed toward the canyon. "Mala tierra," she whispered. "Bad land." Elias scanned the area, seeing nothing obvious to fear. The canyon was silent, the only movement the occasional desert hawk circling overhead. Yet something felt off, an instinct honed through years of combat, whispering warnings he couldn't quite decipher. "Is there another way?" he asked, gesturing around the canyon. Kina Alda shook her head. "Nijoni," she said insistently, pointing into the canyon depths. Her sister was in there, or had passed this way. Elias dismounted, helping the girl down. "Stay behind me," he instructed, drawing his rifle. They would proceed on foot, leading dust. Better to move quietly and keep the horse calm if trouble arose. The canyon narrowed as they advanced, the walls closing in until they were walking single file through a passage barely wide enough for the horse. Dust snorted nervously, ears flicking back and forth. Ahead, the passage opened into a wider area, some kind of enclosed canyon floor. As they reached the opening, Elias stopped abruptly. The sight before him froze the blood in his veins. Reynolds and his men were there, but not as Elias had expected to find them. They lay scattered across the dusty ground, bodies contorted in death. No obvious wounds marked them, no blood, no signs of struggle. They simply appeared to have dropped where they stood. Among them lay another figure, better dressed and carrying a satchel, now spilled open books and papers scattered around him like fallen leaves. Frank Holloway, the bounty Elias had been pursuing, just as dead as the rest. Kinalda peered around Elias, then made a small, distressed sound. She darted forward before he could stop her, rushing to the far side of the canyon, where a slumped figure leaned against the rock wall. A young woman in traditional Apache dress, wrists bound with rope head, bowed. "Nijoni," Kinalda cried, the first English word Elias had heard her speak. The woman's head lifted slowly, revealing a face beautiful despite the dirt and bruises that marked it. Her eyes, unlike her sister's, burned with a fierce intelligence and unmistakable hatred as they locked on Elias. "Get away from her," she said in perfect English, struggling to stand despite her bonds. "You've done enough, white man." Elias approached slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "I'm not with them," he said, gesturing to the dead men. "I found your sister at the mission ruins. She asked for my help." The woman Najoni looked from Elias to Kinalda, who was now speaking rapidly in Apache, her small hands gesturing emphatically. "Untie me," Najoni said finally, still wary but seemingly convinced by her sister's words. "Then we need to leave, now." Elias complied, using his knife to cut through the ropes, binding her wrists. "What happened here?" he asked, eyeing the dead men. "The canyon happened," Najoni said cryptically, rubbing her raw wrists. "The ancestors protect what's theirs." She stood shakily, accepting her sister's support. "We need to go. Others will come." "Others? You mean more of Locke's men?" Najoni's gaze snapped to his. "How do you know that name?" "His men attacked us at the mission," Elias explained. "They were looking for Holloway, and—" He hesitated. "Something a girl knows." Something flickered across Najoni's face, fear or recognition, Elias couldn't tell which. She exchanged rapid words with Kinalda, who nodded solemnly. "Who are you?" Najoni demanded, turning back to Elias. "Elias Boone. I was tracking Holloway for the bounty." He gestured to the dead professor. "Seems that's not going to happen now." "No," Najoni agreed, "but Raymond Locke will pay much more than your bounty to get what he wants." She straightened, seeming to reach a decision. "Help us get back to our people safely, and I'll tell you everything. Why Holloway came to us, what Locke is after, and why those men died without a mark on them." Elias glanced at the bodies again, a chill running down his spine despite the desert heat. "And if I refuse—" Najoni's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Then you'll never leave this canyon alive, Elias Boone. The ancestors are still watching." As if to emphasize her words, a sudden wind whipped through the canyon, stirring dust devils around the dead men. The same unnatural wind that had appeared at the ruins. Elias wasn't a superstitious man, but twice in one day strained coincidence. "I'll help you," he said finally, "but I want answers. When we're safe." She agreed, then turned to examine the scattered contents of Holloway's satchel. She collected several pages, folding them carefully before tucking them into her clothing. "Let's go. There's another way out to the north." As they prepared to leave, Elias knelt beside Holloway's body. The man's expression was peaceful, as though he'd simply lain down to rest. In his hand, he clutched a small, leather-bound journal. Elias pried it free, leafing through pages filled with drawings, notes, and maps. "He was obsessed with finding it," Najoni said, watching him. "The place where ancestors rest. He believed it held knowledge beyond price." "Did it?" Elias asked, pocketing the journal. Najoni's expression remained unreadable. "It held something. Whether it was what he sought, that's a different question." They left the canyon by a narrow trail that wound up the northern wall, invisible unless you knew where to look. Elias led dust carefully while Najoni supported her sister, who seemed to be weakening now that the immediate danger had passed. As they crested the canyon rim, Elias looked back at the bodies below, now mere specks on the dusty floor. He couldn't help but wonder if he was making the biggest mistake of his life, or perhaps taking the first step toward redemption he'd been seeking for 10 long years. Either way, there was no turning back now. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, hiding secrets, both ancient and new, beneath its scorching surface. And somewhere out there, Raymond Locke waited, hunting a treasure only Najoni and her sister understood. Elias checked his ammunition, adjusted his hat against the glaring sun, and set his face toward the northern horizon. If answers lay in that direction, he would find them or die trying. The ghost of Sand Creek walked with him still, but for the first time in years, Elias Boone felt like he might be moving towards something rather than just running from his past. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon when Elias finally called for a halt. They had traveled for hours across unforgiving terrain, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Canyon of Death. Kinalda had weakened considerably during the journey, her small face drawn with exhaustion. Even Najoni, despite her fierce determination, was swaying in the saddle. "We'll rest here," Elias decided, gesturing toward a cluster of rock formations that would provide both shelter and a defensible position. "Make camp before dark." Najoni nodded, too tired to argue. She helped her sister down from dust with gentle hands, murmuring words of encouragement in Apache. Elias busied himself gathering what sparse vegetation he could find for a small fire, aware of Najoni's eyes following his every move. The land around them was transitioning from desert to scrubland, with scattered junipers and pinyon pines dotting the landscape. A good sign they were moving into higher elevation where water would be more plentiful. As darkness fell, the three sat around a carefully built fire small enough to provide warmth without announcing their presence to anyone who might be searching the night. Elias offered them jerky and hardtack from his provisions, which they accepted without comment. "Time for answers," Elias said, finally breaking the silence. "What's Raymond Locke after, and why did those men die in that canyon?" Najoni studied him across the flames, the firelight casting dancing shadows across her face. Her bruises looked worse in the dim light, evidence of rough handling by Reynolds and his men. Yet there was nothing broken in her spirit. Her eyes remained defiant, wary. "First, I want to know who you really are," she countered. "My sister says you helped her, but I know you're kind. Army man turned bounty hunter. Why should I trust you?" Elias considered the question. "You shouldn't," he said honestly. "But right now I'm all you've got." A hint of surprise crossed her face at his bluntness. "I was a captain in the Union Army," he continued. "Served under General Carleton during the Apache campaigns. After what happened at Sand Creek, I couldn't do it anymore." Sand Creek. Najoni's expression hardened. "That was Cheyenne, not Apache." "I know. I wasn't there for the massacre itself, arrived after." Elias's voice grew distant. "What I saw, what men I'd respected had done to women and children." He shook his head. "I resigned my commission the next day. Been hunting bounties ever since." "Exchanging one form of blood money for another," she observed coldly. Elias didn't deny it. "The men I hunt deserve what's coming to them." "And did we?" Najoni challenged, gesturing to herself and her sleeping sister. "Did the Apache deserve what came to them?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as a thundercloud. Elias had asked himself the same thing countless times over the years. "No," he said finally. "You didn't." Something shifted in Najoni's gaze, not trust exactly, but perhaps a willingness to listen. "Raymond Locke wants what all white men want in our lands," she said after a long pause. "Gold, silver, copper. But what he seeks is more valuable than any of those. The place where ancestors rest," Elias said, remembering Holloway's journal. "What is it?" Najoni reached into her clothing and withdrew the folded papers she had taken from Holloway's satchel. She held them up but didn't offer them to Elias. "These are maps, incomplete ones. For generations, my people have guarded a sacred place, a series of caves hidden deep in the mountains. The Spanish called it La Boca del Espíritu, the spirit's mouth. It contains not only the remains of our great leaders, but also our knowledge, our history." "Holloway was searching for it," Elias asked. Najoni nodded. "At first, he came to us as a friend, interested in our ways, our language. He gained the trust of some of our elders." Her expression darkened. "Then Locke's men arrived at our camp, demanding to know the location of the caves. When the elders refused, She faltered for the first time. "They killed them," Elias finished for her. "All but one. Nahuko's gray bear escaped with some of our people, including Canalda and me. We fled into the mountains, but Holloway tracked us begging forgiveness, claiming he never intended for violence." She laughed bitterly, as if his intentions mattered. "Why did he care so much about finding these caves?" "Holloway believed the caves contained ancient knowledge, star maps, medical wisdom, mining techniques. Things your universities would pay fortunes to possess." Najoni's fingers tightened around the papers. But he didn't understand what he was looking for. "The caves hold something far more valuable than gold or knowledge." "What?" Elias pressed. Najoni hesitated, then said simply, "Power." A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness beyond their fire, the sound echoing across the empty land. Kinaalda stirred in her sleep, murmuring something before settling again. "What kind of power?" Elias asked, thinking of the strange storm at the ruins, the men dead without a mark. "The kind your people have always feared and coveted," Najoni replied. "The reason you called our medicine men devils, our ceremonies witchcraft, the connection between our people and the earth itself." Elias remained skeptical. "And Locke believes this." "Locke doesn't care about beliefs. He cares about results. He's seen enough to know there's something worth finding." She nodded toward Canalda. "My sister is Kay Nalyehe, born with the gift of harmony. She can speak to the winds, the rain, the earth itself. That's why Locke wants her." "To find the caves," Elias concluded. "Yes, and once he does," Najoni's voice hardened, "he'll destroy everything. The knowledge, the history, the power, all to ensure no Apache ever threatens his control of these lands again. Elias leaned back, absorbing this information. Part of him, the rational military part, dismissed it as superstition. Yet he had seen strange things today that defied explanation. Those men in the canyon, he said, how did they die? Najoni's eyes reflected the firelight like polished obsidian. The canyon is protected by ancient spirits. They recognize those who enter with violence in their hearts. In Holloway, he knew the risks. He entered anyway, believing his knowledge would protect him. She shrugged. It didn't. Elias studied her, trying to determine how much of what she said was belief and how much was truth. It didn't matter, he decided. Whether the danger came from supernatural forces or angry Apache warriors, the threat to these women was real. Where is this gray bear taking your people? He asked. North to the high country. There's a valley there where our people have gathered in times of danger for generations. It's where we were headed when Reynolds caught us. Najoni's expression softened as she looked at her sleeping sister. Kinalda ran while they took me. She was supposed to find Nahukos, not a white bounty hunter. Lucky for both of you that she did, Elias pointed out. Najoni didn't argue. Instead, she asked, will you help us reach our people? Elias considered the question. His original mission capturing Holloway was finished. He could return to Santa Fe, report the man's death, perhaps even collect a partial reward. But something held him back. These women needed protection, and more importantly, whatever Locke was planning needed to be stopped. I'll help you, he said finally, but there's something you should know. He pulled Holloway's journal from his pocket. I took this from his body. If it contains information about the caves, give it to me, Najoni demanded, suddenly alert. Elias held the journal out of reach. Not yet. This may be the only leverage we have if Locke catches up to us. It's not yours to keep, her voice rose. Those secrets belong to my people, and I'll make sure they get back to your people, Elias promised. But for now it stays with me. Their eyes locked in silent battle, neither willing to yield. Finally, Najoni looked away. If you betray us, she said softly, the canyon death will seem merciful compared to what I'll bring upon you. Elias believed her. They set out at first light, traveling north through increasingly rugged terrain. Kinalda seemed stronger after a night's rest, though she remained quieter than before. Occasionally she would stop to touch a plant or rock, whispering words Elias couldn't understand, as if communicating with the land itself. Najoni rode behind Elias on dust, her body tense with the forced proximity. How far to this valley? He asked over his shoulder. 2 days if we're not delayed, she replied, but we'll need to be careful. We must cross open country before reaching the mountains. The morning passed uneventfully as they followed game trails through scrubland that gradually gave way to scattered pines and small meadows. Water became more plentiful, allowing them to refill canteens from clear streams. Around midday, they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the territory spread before them. In the far distance, a smudge of smoke rose against the sky. What's that? Elias asked, pointing. Najoni squinted. A settlement, perhaps, or a ranch. Elias shook his head. Too much smoke for a settlement. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. That's a signal fire. Locke's men, possibly, or Apache. He studied the horizon. Either way, we should avoid it. They altered course, moving northeast rather than due north. The day grew warmer as the sun climbed higher, and they took shelter in a grove of pines during the hottest hours. As they rested, Elias found himself studying Holloway's journal more carefully. The man had been meticulous in his notes, detailed drawings of landmarks, transcriptions of Apache words, with attempted translations and maps marked with cryptic symbols. One passage caught his attention. The entrance lies not where expected. The mountains guard their secrets, well presenting false doors to mislead the unworthy. Only those who understand the language of stone can find the true path. Elias looked up to find Najoni watching him. What does it mean, the language of stone? He asked. She hesitated, then said, the caves are hidden within a maze of canyons. Many tunnels lead nowhere to deadly drops. Only those who can read the ancient signs know which path to take. And Kinalda can read these signs. She can do more than read them. She can speak to them. Najoni's voice held a mixture of pride and worry. It's why Locke wants her alive. Elias glanced at the girl who was kneeling by a small stream, hands cupped in the water lips, moving in silent communion with something unseen. Has she always had this gift? He asked. Since birth. Our mother had it too, though not as strongly. Najoni's eyes followed her sister. In the old days, she would have been trained by our wisest elders. Now there are too few left to teach her properly. The vulnerability in her voice struck Elias unexpectedly. You're trying to protect her from more than just Locke, aren't you? Najoni met his gaze steadily. Our ways are dying, Elias Boone. Our people scattered or confined to reservations. The place where ancestors rest may be the last repository of who we truly are. She gestured to Canalda, and she may be the last of her kind. The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. He had seen it happening during his army years, the systematic destruction of native cultures, languages, beliefs. At the time, he'd accepted it as inevitable, even necessary for progress. Now, watching this young girl commune with forces he couldn't understand, he felt the magnitude of what was being lost. We should move on, he said, finally uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. Cover more ground before dark. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain becoming increasingly difficult for Dust to navigate. By evening, they had reached the foothills of the mountains Najoni had described, jagged peaks that cut into the sky like stone teeth. Elias found a sheltered spot between two large boulders to make camp positioned so they could see anyone approaching from the open country behind them. As he gathered wood for a fire, he noticed Kinalda tracing symbols in the dirt with a stick, her invasive tent with concentration. What is she doing? He asked Najoni. Leaving a message for Nahukos, she explained, telling him we're coming, but not alone. Elias frowned. Is that wise? If Locke's men find these markings, they won't understand them, Najoni assured him, and they'll be gone by morning. Sure enough, when Elias checked the ground the next morning, the symbols had vanished, as if they'd never been there. He told himself it was just wind and dew, but doubt gnawed at the edges of his rational mind. They set off into the mountains, following trails so faint that Elias would have missed them entirely without Najoni's guidance. Dust struggled on the steeper inclines, forcing them to dismount and lead him carefully over rocky terrain. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the way they had come. The land stretched away below them, rippling with hills and valleys, the distant desert shimmering in the heat. There, Elias said, suddenly pointing southwest. Riders! Najoni followed his gaze. 5 riders moved across the land below, following their trail with unmistakable purpose. Locke's men, she confirmed grimly. They're tracking us. Elias judged the distance. They're half a day behind at least. If we keep moving, we can stay ahead. They pushed on, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, the pine forests thicker. Game was plentiful here. Deer bounded away at their approach, and once they spotted a black bear fishing in a stream. Late in the afternoon, as they navigated a particularly treacherous slope, Dust lost his footing. The horse whinnied in panic as stones clattered down the mountainside. Elias lunged for the reins, but too late, Dust slid backward, taking their supplies with him. Najoni pulled Kinalda clear as the horse tumbled down the slope, coming to rest 20 feet below, legs thrashing in pain and fear. Elias scrambled down to his faithful mount, heart sinking as he saw the unnatural angle of Dust's front leg. A clean break impossible to splint in these conditions. Najoni and Kinalda joined him, both understanding immediately. Kinalda knelt beside the suffering animal, stroking his neck and singing softly. The horse gradually calmed under her touch, his panicked eyes growing peaceful. I'm sorry, old friend, Elias murmured, drawing his revolver. He met Najoni's gaze over the horse's body. Take your sister up the trail. She nodded, leading Kinalda away. When they were out of sight, Elias pressed his forehead briefly against Dust's neck, then put the animal out of his misery with a single shot. The sound echoed through the mountains like a thunderclap. Elias salvaged what supplies he could, then rejoined the women. Najoni said nothing about Dust, but her eyes held a new respect for the way Elias had handled the situation. We need to move faster now, she said instead. That shot will carry for miles. They continued their ascent now, burdened with the supplies they had to carry themselves. The mountains seemed to close in around them, the trail narrowing until they were moving single file along ledges barely wide enough for their feet. As dusk approached, Kinalda suddenly stopped, head tilted as if listening. What is it? Najoni asked in Apache. The girl pointed ahead excitedly, breaking into a run, despite her exhaustion. Kinalda, Najoni called, hurrying after her. Elias followed, one hand on his rifle. They rounded a bend in the trail and found themselves facing a sheer cliff wall split by a narrow crevice. Kinalda stood before it, hands raised as if in greeting. From within the crevice, a figure emerged, tall and straight-backed, despite his advanced years, with a face weathered by time and hardship. A Winchester rifle rested easily in his hands, aimed squarely at Elias's chest. "Nahukos!" Kinalda cried, running to the old man. Gray Bear embraced the girl with one arm, keeping his rifle trained on Elias. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, assessed the white man with cold calculation. Najoni stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Apache. Elias caught the tension in her voice, the urgency of her explanation. Gray Bear listened without changing expression, his gaze never leaving Elias. Finally, the old warrior lowered his rifle slightly. "You bring a white man to our sanctuary," he said to Najoni in heavily accented English, "after what they did to our people." "He saved us," Najoni replied, "and he knows about Locke's plans." Gray Bear's eyes narrowed. "The man who hunts our children." "The same." The old Apache studied Elias for a long moment, then gestured toward the crevice. "Come, before darkness falls." They followed him through the narrow opening, which widened into a hidden path winding upward through the cliff face. After several hundred yards, the path opened onto a small plateau nestled between towering peaks, a natural fortress invisible from below. A dozen simple shelters stood in a semicircle around a central fire pit. Women stirred cooking pots, while children played quietly nearby. Men stood guard at strategic points around the perimeter. All activity ceased as they entered the camp, every eye turning to the stranger in their midst. Gray Bear spoke loudly in Apache, explaining Elias's presence. Murmurs rippled through the gathered people, some angry, others merely curious. One man stepped forward, younger than Gray Bear, but with the same proud bearing. He wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and items clearly taken from white settlers, a calico shirt, cavalry boots. A revolver hung at his hip. "This is C," Najoni explained quietly to Elias, "Gray Bear's son." C approached them, his expression hostile. "You bring an army man here," he demanded of Najoni. "Have you forgotten what they did to your family? To all our families." "I haven't forgotten," she replied evenly, "but he's not army anymore, and he knows about the caves." C's hand moved to his revolver. Then perhaps he should not leave this place alive. Elias remained still, aware that any sudden movement might be his last. These people had every reason to hate him and what he represented. "Enough," Gray Bear commanded. "The council will decide what to do with him." He turned to Elias. "Until then, you will be watched. If you try to leave or signal to others, you will die." Elias nodded his understanding. He was led to a small shelter at the edge of the camp, where two armed men took up positions outside. Najoni and Kinalda disappeared with the Gray Bear toward the central fire. Left alone, Elias took stock of his situation. He had walked willingly into an Apache stronghold, carrying knowledge that could either save these people or destroy them. The journal in his pocket felt suddenly heavy with responsibility. Outside, he heard the camp settling for the night, voices murmuring in a language he didn't understand. Children were hushed, guards changed position. Normal life continuing, despite extraordinary circumstances. He thought of the riders following their trail. If Locke's men found this place, there would be a massacre. These few survivors, perhaps the last free Apache in this part of the territory, would be wiped out. A soft footfall outside his shelter drew his attention. C entered, his hand still resting on his revolver. Behind him came Najoni, her face set in determined lines. "The council has questions," C announced without preamble. "You will answer truthfully, or I will put a bullet in your heart." Elias nodded. "I understand." "First," Najoni said, "show us the journal." Elias hesitated only briefly before retrieving Holloway's journal from his pocket. He handed it to her, watching as she and C examined the pages with growing concern. "He knew more than we thought," Najoni murmured, pointing to a particular drawing. C's expression darkened. "If Locke has similar information—" "He doesn't," Elias interjected. "Not yet, anyway. That's why he needs your sister." Both Apache turned to him, their faces showing surprise that he had followed their exchange. "Holloway was working with Locke," Elias continued, "but he was keeping secrets too. I think he wanted the caves for himself." "To what end?" C demanded. Elias thought of the passages he'd read in the journal. Fame, recognition. He believed these caves contained knowledge that would rewrite history, prove that the Apache and other tribes had advanced understanding of astronomy, medicine, perhaps even metallurgy long before European contact. And this matters to white men, C asked skeptically. To some, not to Locke. Elias met Najoni's gaze. He just wants the land and whatever resources he can extract from it. Najoni closed the journal her decision made. We need to reach the caves before Locke does. Seal them if necessary. The elders would never allow it, C protested. The elders are dead, Ipai, she replied harshly, except for your father, and he agrees with me. C fell silent, internal conflict evident on his face. Finally, he turned back to Elias. Why would you help us? What do you gain? It was the question Elias had been asking himself since he first decided to help Canalda at the mission ruins. What did he hope to gain? Not money, not fame, perhaps not even redemption. I'm tired, he said finally. Tired of watching your people driven from their lands, their children taken their way of life destroyed. I was part of that once. I don't want to be anymore. She studied him, searching for deception. Pretty words, but I have heard white men speak prettily before while their hands took everything we had. I can't change what others have done, Elias said. I can only choose what I do now. Before Say could respond, shouts erupted outside the shelter. A young Apache warrior burst in, speaking rapidly. C's expression turned grim. What is it? Elias asked. Scouts have spotted riders approaching from the south. Najoni translated. At least a dozen men heavily armed. Locke, Elias said with certainty. They must have picked up our trail faster than I thought. Or they had help, C suggested darkly, his suspicious gaze falling on Elias. If I'd wanted to lead them here, I wouldn't have killed my horse to avoid leaving tracks, Elias pointed out. Another exchange in Apache followed too fast for Elias to catch. Finally, Najoni turned to him. We're leaving, she announced. Now, Gray Bear will lead the others north to safety. Her eyes held a challenge. Sa and I are going to the caves. Are you coming with us? Elias understood the choice before him. He could stay with the main group, help defend them if necessary, then find his own way back to civilization. Or he could venture deeper into Apache territory toward caves that might not even exist, pursued by men who would kill him without hesitation. I'll come, he said, rising to his feet. C's lip curled in what might have been derision or reluctant respect. Then we move now under cover of darkness. If we are lucky, Locke will follow the larger group. And if we're not lucky, Elias asked. Najoni's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Then they follow us straight to the place where ancestors rest. A smile touched her lips, cold and fierce, and they learn why it bears that name. They move like ghosts through the mountain darkness, three figures threading their way along ridge lines and narrow passes that would have been perilous even in daylight. C led the way, his knowledge of the terrain evident in every confident step. Najoni followed, occasionally supporting herself against rock walls when the path grew treacherous. Elias brought up the rear alert for any sound of pursuit. The moon had risen 3/4 full, casting enough light to navigate by, but also enough to make them visible if anyone was watching the heights. Clouds scudded across the night sky, occasionally plunging them into complete darkness before releasing them again to the moon's silver glow. After several hours of silent travel, C raised a hand, bringing them to a halt at the edge of a drop-off. Below stretched a valley narrow and deep, with a silver ribbon of water cutting through its center. On the far side rose another mountain face even steeper than the one they had descended. We rest here until dawn, C announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Crossing the valley in darkness would be suicide. They found shelter beneath an overhanging rock, huddling together for warmth in the mountain chill. No fire tonight, the risk of detection was too great. Elias positioned himself at the edge of their shelter, watching the valley below for any sign of movement. His body ached from the punishing pace C had set, but his mind remained sharp, processing all he had learned. How far to the caves? He asked quietly. A day's journey, Najoni replied, beyond the next mountain. And Kinalda, safe with Gray Bear and the others heading north. Her voice softened when speaking of her sister. She will guide them to another sanctuary while we deal with Locke. Elias glanced at her. You're protective of her. She's all I have left. The simple statement carried the weight of mountains. C, who had been keeping watch at the other end of their shelter, spoke without turning. Tell him about your parents, Najoni. Tell him what his people did. Najoni shot C a sharp look, but the young warrior had already returned his attention to the darkness beyond. After a moment, she sighed. My father was a medicine man, she said, her voice low. He refused to lead our people to the reservation at San Carlos. Said it was a place of death for Apache. He was right, disease-starvation soldiers who took pleasure in punishment. Her fingers absently traced patterns in the dust beside her. When the army came to our village, he stood before them unarmed, asking only that they let us remain on our ancestral lands. She fell silent for so long that Elias thought she might not continue. When she did, her voice had hardened. They shot him where he stood, made an example of him. My mother tried to shield Kinalda and me with her body. They killed her too. Her eyes found Elias in the darkness. I was 15. Kinalda was 5. Elias felt the familiar weight of shame settle on his shoulders. I'm sorry, he said, knowing the inadequacy of the words even as he spoke them. Your sorrow changes nothing. Z interjected from his position. Your kind have been sorry while taking everything from us. Some of us are trying to do better, Elias replied, meeting the young man's hostile gaze. When it's already too late. C turned away again, ending the conversation. The night deepened around them, the cold growing more intense. Elias offered Najoni his coat, which she refused with a shake of her head. We Apache are not so fragile, she said, though she huddled deeper into her own clothing. Save your strength for tomorrow. Elias nodded, respecting her pride. How did you survive? He asked after a while. After your parents? Nahuko's found us, she answered. He had been a friend of my father's. He took us in, taught us to survive in the new world your people created. Her voice took on a hint of grudging respect. He believes adaptation is our only hope, learning your ways while keeping our own alive in our hearts. And C disagrees. A small smile touched her lips. C believes the only good white man is a dead one. Can't say I blame him, Elias admitted, and yet here you are risking your life to help us. Najoni studied him curiously. Why? It was the same question C had asked earlier, but coming from Najoni, it felt different, genuine curiosity rather than accusation. I've done things I'm not proud of, Elias said finally. Things that wake me in the night, make me reach for a bottle to quiet the memories. He met her gaze. I can't bring back those who've died. Can't change what happened at Sand Creek or 100 other places, but maybe I can stop it from happening again here and now. Najoni considered his words. Redemption. I don't know if there is such a thing or men like me, he replied honestly, but I have to try anyway. Something shifted in her expression, not forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. Before she could respond, C moved suddenly from his position, body tense with alertness. Movement, he whispered, in the valley. Elias joined him at the edge of their shelter, eyes straining to pierce the darkness below. For a moment he saw nothing. Then a flicker of movement, the moonlight catching on something metallic. Riders, he confirmed. At least 6, maybe more. Locke's men, Najoni said, coming up beside them. They must have followed our trail instead of Gray Bear's group. C cursed softly in Apache. How did they track us through the mountains in darkness? A cold realization settled over Elias. They have an Apache scout, he said grimly. Someone who knows these trails as well as you do. Impossible, C insisted. No Apache would help Locke. Unless they had no choice, Najoni suggested quietly, or unless they believed the reward was worth the betrayal. C's expression hardened. If I find such a traitor, they will beg for death before I'm finished. Elias studied the riders' progress. They had reached the stream at the valley's center and were allowing their horses to drink. From this distance, he couldn't make out individual features, but one thing was clear, they were heavily armed rifles gleaming in the moonlight. They'll make camp soon, he observed. Too dangerous to cross the valley in darkness, even with a guide. Then we have until dawn, C said. We should move now, get as far ahead as possible. No, Elias countered. We rest, regain our strength, leave an hour before first light. I don't take orders from you, white man, C bristled. It's not an order, it's strategy. Elias kept his voice calm. If we push on now, we'll be exhausted when we need our strength most. Better to be rested and an hour ahead than stumbling and 2 hours ahead. The Apache warrior glared at him clearly, wanting to reject any suggestion from a white man on principle. But after a moment, he grudgingly nodded. Dawn then, but not a minute later. They settled into an uneasy rest, taking turns keeping watch. Elias found sleep elusive, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. The caves lay a day's journey away across terrain he didn't know, pursued by men who wanted him dead. And even if they reached their destination first, what then? How could three people, no matter how determined, stop Locke and his mercenaries? When his turn at watch came, Elias studied Holloway's journal again by moonlight. The professor's notes became increasingly erratic toward the end, filled with excitement and paranoia in equal measure. One passage stood out. The entrance is marked by the Weeping Woman, a rock formation visible only when the sun strikes it at midday. Beyond lies the Guardian's Path, a series of tunnels where many have died, their bones testimony to the cave's protection. The Apache speak of voices in the darkness, spirits that confuse and mislead those whose hearts are impure. Superstition surely, yet I cannot shake the feeling of being watched whenever I approach. Elias closed the journal troubled. Holloway had been a man of science, yet something about the caves had affected him deeply. Was there truth to Najoni's claims about the power these caves contained? As the eastern sky began to lighten, Elias woke his companions. They ate a sparse breakfast of jerky and dried fruit, then prepared to move out. "We'll cross the valley quickly," C instructed. "Stay low, use whatever cover you can find. Once we reach the other side, there's a hidden path up the mountain face." Elias nodded, checking his rifle and revolver one last time. "And if we're spotted?" C's expression was grim. "Then we fight, or we die." The descent into the valley was treacherous, loose scree, threatening to send them sliding down the steep slope with every step. They moved diagonally, using what few sturdy plants and rocks they could find for handholds. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sky had lightened to a pale gray, though the sun had yet to crest the eastern peaks. The stream provided welcome relief after their descent. They refilled canteens quickly, then started across the open ground toward the far mountain. Elias felt exposed, constantly scanning the valley in both directions for signs of movement. They were halfway across when Najoni suddenly froze. "Listen," she whispered. Elias strained his ears, but heard nothing unusual, just the gurgle of the stream and the faint rustle of wind through scrub brush. "Horses," he said, his sharper hearing picking up what Elias could not. "Moving fast, upstream." "Run," Elias urged, abandoning caution. "For the mountain." They sprinted across the remaining open ground, painfully visible against the valley floor. As they reached the first rocky outcroppings at the base of the far mountain, a shout echoed behind them. "There, three of them!" A rifle shot cracked the morning silence, the bullet throwing up dirt near Elias's feet. More shots followed as they scrambled for cover. "The path," C shouted, gesturing toward a nearly invisible crevice in the rock face. "Go." Najoni went first, slipping into the narrow opening. Elias followed, then C bullets pinging off the rocks around them. The crevice widened into a steep, winding trail that zigzagged up the mountain face, hidden from below by strategic outcroppings. They climbed frantically, driven by the sounds of pursuit. Elias's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning with the effort. Above them, the mountain seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. "Keep moving," C urged from behind him. "They'll have to abandon their horses to follow us here." Elias glanced back and saw C's face contorted in pain. Blood darkened the Apache's left sleeve. "You're hit," he said. "It's nothing." C insisted, though his complexion had paled beneath his copper skin. "Keep climbing." They pushed on higher and higher up the narrow trail. The sounds of pursuit grew more distant as Locke's men were forced to dismount and follow on foot. By mid-morning, they had reached a ledge wide enough to stop and rest. Najoni immediately went to examine C's wound. The bullet passed through, she reported, tearing strips from her own clothing to bind the injury. "But you're losing blood." "I'll live," C said through gritted teeth. Elias kept watch while Najoni treated her companion. The trail behind them remained clear for the moment, but he could see figures moving in the valley below. Locke's men spreading out to search for the hidden path. "They'll find it eventually," he said. "We need to keep moving." "There's another way," Najoni said, finishing C's bandage. "A tunnel through the mountain itself. It comes out closer to the caves." "You didn't mention this before," Elias noted. "Because it's dangerous," T interjected. "The tunnel is unstable in places. It could collapse." "Still better than being shot," Elias pointed out. Najoni nodded in agreement. "The entrance is not far from here." They continued along the ledge, which gradually widened into a true trail again. C moved more slowly now. his injury clearly paining him despite his stoic expression. After half an hour, they reached a rockfall that appeared to block their path completely. Here, Najoni said, moving to a section of the fall that looked no different from any other to Elias's eyes. She began shifting smaller rocks aside, revealing a dark opening, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. "You go first," she told Elias. "I'll help see." Elias hesitated, then nodded. He removed his pack and pushed it through the opening before following on hands and knees. The tunnel beyond was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and stone. He pulled a match from his pocket, struck it against the rock wall, and held it up to survey their path. The tunnel extended before him, rough-hewn and low-ceilinged, but passable. Ancient support timbers weathered almost to dust lined the walls at irregular intervals. "An old mining tunnel?" he asked as Najoni helped see through the opening. "Older than that," she replied. "My people dug this path generations ago during wars with the Navajo." C managed to stand, though he leaned heavily against the wall. "We need to block the entrance," he said. "Slow them down if they find it." Elias nodded, moving back to the opening. Together, he and Najoni shifted rocks to cover the entrance, again leaving no trace of their passage. As the last stone fell into place, darkness enveloped them completely. "I have this," Najoni said. Rustling sounds followed, then a soft glow illuminated her face as she lit a small torch made from pitch-soaked wood. "Always prepared," Elias commented, impressed. "Apache women learn to anticipate needs," she replied simply. "Let's move." The torch cast eerie shadows as they made their way deeper into the mountain. The tunnel occasionally branched, but Najoni navigated the maze with confidence, never hesitating at intersections. C followed, one hand pressed to his wounded arm, his face growing increasingly drawn as they progressed. Elias brought up the rear, acutely aware of the tons of rock pressing down above them. He had never cared for enclosed spaces, and this tunnel with its low ceiling, forcing him to stoop, and its walls sometimes narrowing until they brushed his shoulders, tested his composure. "How far does this go?" he asked, as much to hear a human voice in the oppressive darkness as to gain information. "It comes out near Eagle Peak," Najoni answered. "Perhaps 4 hours' journey if we move steadily." "And the caves? Beyond Eagle Peak lies the Valley of Shadows. The caves are there." They walked in silence after that conserving energy. The air grew thinner as they progressed deeper into the mountain, making breathing more labored. Twice they had to navigate sections where the ceiling had partially collapsed, forcing them to crawl on their bellies through narrow gaps. During one such passage, C's strength finally failed him. He slumped forward, face pressed against the cool stone. "I need rest," he gasped. Najoni looked back in alarm. "Not here, the tunnel widens ahead." With Elias's help, they managed to get C through the narrow section to a small chamber beyond. The wounded Apache collapsed against a wall, his breathing shallow. "He's burning with fever," Najoni said, touching his forehead. "The wound must be infected." Elias examined C's arm. The bandage was soaked through with blood, and the skin around it had taken on an angry red hue. "He needs medicine, real medicine." "There's no medicine out here," Najoni replied grimly. "And even if there was, we can't go back." She rummaged in her small pack, producing a pouch of dried herbs. "This will help with the fever, but—" She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew that without proper treatment, C's condition would only worsen. "I can go on alone," Elias suggested. "Get to the caves, do what needs to be done." C's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "No," he growled. "Never trust a white man with our sacred places." "You don't have much choice," Elias pointed out. "You can barely stand." "I would rather die than—" "Enough," Najoni interrupted. "Neither of you is going alone." She crushed the herbs between her fingers, then moistened them with water from her canteen to form a paste. "This will buy us time. We'll rest here, then continue together." She applied the paste to C's wound, murmuring words in Apache that sounded like a prayer or incantation. C gradually relaxed, his eyes closing as whatever was in the herbs took effect. Elias settled against the opposite wall, stretching his legs in the cramped space. "Will he make it?" Najoni looked up, her face ghostly in the torch's flickering light. "He is strong and stubborn. Runs in the family," Elias observed, earning a fleeting smile from her. "Nahuko's raised him to be a warrior in the old way," she said. "But the old ways are dying, no matter how tightly we hold on to them." She glanced at the sleeping C. "He refuses to accept that." "And you?" Elias asked. Najoni was silent for a long moment. "I accept that change comes whether we wish it or not. But I believe some things must be preserved, protected. Her eyes met his. That's why the caves matter. They hold not just our past, but the essence of who we are. What will you do if we reach them before locks seal them up? If necessary, she nodded. Better they remain hidden forever than fall into hands that would profane them. Elias thought about what such a decision would mean, centuries of knowledge and history lost to the world. Yet he couldn't argue with her reasoning. He'd seen firsthand what happened when white civilization encountered native cultures, the destruction, the exploitation, the loss. And what about you, Najoni asked suddenly. If we succeed, what then? Back to bounty hunting. The question caught Elias off guard. He hadn't thought beyond their immediate goal of reaching the caves before Locke. The future, his future, was a hazy concept at best. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe it's time to stop running from what I was. Find something better to be. Like what? He shrugged. Never been much good at anything except tracking and shooting. Not exactly peaceful skills. Skills can serve different purposes, she observed. A knife can kill or heal depending on who holds it. Before Elias could respond, a distant sound reached them, faint but unmistakable. Voices echoing through the tunnel. They found the entrance, he said, coming to his feet. We need to move. Najoni quickly gathered her things and roused C. The Apache warrior came awake with a grimace of pain, but he managed to stand whatever herbs Najoni had used, having granted him a temporary renewal of strength. How far behind are they? He asked, his voice hoarse. Can't tell, Elias replied, listening intently. The tunnel distorts sound. Could be an hour, could be less. Then we move faster, C said grimly. They continued their journey through the mountain's heart, now driven by the knowledge of pursuit. The tunnel began to slope upward, growing steeper, until they were practically climbing rather than walking. C struggled visibly but refused any offer of assistance from Elias. After what felt like hours, a change in the air current suggested they were nearing an exit. The stale, confined atmosphere gave way to fresher breezes, carrying the scent of pine and open spaces. Almost there, Najoni encouraged, supporting C as he stumbled. The tunnel ended abruptly at a vertical shaft with crude handholds carved into the rock. Daylight filtered down from above, a welcome sight after their long journey through darkness. I'll go first, Elias offered. Make sure it's clear. Neither Apache objected this time. Elias climbed carefully, testing each handhold before trusting his weight to it. 20 feet up, he reached the surface, emerging into a stand of dense pines. The sun was already past its zenith. They had spent more time in the tunnel than he'd realized. After ensuring no immediate threats lurked nearby, Elias signaled for the others to follow. Najoni came next, then helped C, who emerged pale and sweating from the exertion. There, Najoni said, pointing to a jagged peak rising above the tree line to the north. Eagle Peak. Beyond it lies the Valley of Shadows. Elias studied their surroundings, orienting himself. They stood on a forested slope, the mountain they had tunneled through looming behind them. Ahead, the land descended into a pine-filled valley before rising again toward Eagle Peak. The terrain was rough but passable. How long to the valley, he asked. 3 hours, maybe 4. Najoni estimated, but C needs rest. The Apache warrior shook his head stubbornly. No time. Locke's men follow. You'll slow us down if you collapse, Elias pointed out. Better to rest briefly now than be forced to stop later. Just glared at him, but didn't argue further. They found a sheltered spot beneath a massive pine where Najoni redressed his wound while Elias kept watch. The herbs she had applied earlier had helped, but the infection was clearly spreading. C's arm had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and red streaks extended from the wound toward his shoulder. Blood poisoning, Elias said quietly to Najoni, when C had drifted into a fitful sleep. He needs a doctor. There are no doctors here, she replied, her voice tight with worry. Only the old ways. She touched the stone talisman around her neck, similar to the one Canalda wore. And they are not enough for this. Elias studied her face, seeing the fear she tried to hide. You care for him. It wasn't a question, but Najoni answered anyway. He is like a brother to me. He and Grey Bear took us in when no one else would. Her expression hardened with resolve. I will not lose another family. As C slept, Elias took the opportunity to study Holloway's journal again, focusing on the passages about the Valley of Shadows and the caves. The professor's descriptions grew increasingly fragmented and mystical as he wrote about his approaches to the sacred site. The valley resists intrusion. 3 times I have tried to enter, 3 times turned back by storms that arose from nowhere, by rock slides, with no apparent cause, by an overwhelming sense of dread that seeped into my very bones. The Apache guide laughed at my fear. The ancestors decide who enters, he said, not you. But tomorrow I try again, this time with the stone talisman. He gave me a protection he claims, though I suspect it is merely a psychological crutch. Yet I find myself clutching it as I write these words, drawing comfort from its smooth surface. Strange how quickly rational thought abandons us in the face of the unknown. Elias looked up from the journal to find Najoni watching him. "What is it?" she asked, noting his troubled expression. He hesitated, then showed her the passage. Holloway tried to enter the valley several times before succeeding. He mentioned a talisman like the ones you and Kinalda wear. Najoni touched the stone at her throat. The Kea'an, the life stone, Ba'an. It connects us to the earth, to the ancestors. She glanced at the sleeping sea. Some can feel the connection more strongly than others. Like Kinalda, she nodded. The gift runs strong in my mother's bloodline. And you? Elias asked, curious. A shadow passed across her face. I feel echoes, nothing more. She reached for the journal. May I? Elias handed it to her, watching as she flipped through the pages. Her expression grew increasingly concerned. He knew more than he should have, she said finally. Names, places, ceremonies that are not shared with outsiders. Someone must have told him. Yes. Najoni's voice hardened. Someone betrayed sacred trust. The implication hung between them. The same person might now be helping Locke. Before Elias could pursue this disturbing thought, C stirred, coming awake with a groan of pain. How long? He demanded, struggling to sit up. An hour, Najoni replied. You needed it. C glanced at the sun's position, then at the tunnel entrance they had emerged from. They will be coming soon. We must reach the valley before them. Despite his weakened condition, C insisted on continuing immediately. They helped him to his feet and once again set off through the forest, heading toward the distant peak. The going was difficult, the terrain increasingly steep and rocky as they approached Eagle Peak. C leaned heavily on Najoni, now his face gray with pain and exhaustion. Elias led the way, rifle ready, scanning constantly for signs of pursuit. As they rounded the shoulder of Eagle Peak late in the afternoon, the Valley of Shadows finally came into view. Elias stopped short, understanding immediately why it bore that name. The valley lay like a wound in the earth, deep and narrow, its floor hidden in perpetual shadow cast by the steep walls rising on either side. A stream glinted occasionally where sunlight penetrated the gloom, but most of the valley remained veiled in darkness despite the bright day. There, Najoni said softly, pointing to a distant cliff face on the valley's far side. The weeping woman. Elias squinted, making out a rock formation that indeed resembled a woman's face frozen in an eternal expression of sorrow. Water trickled from a crevice near the eyes, creating the illusion of tears. The entrance to the caves is there, he asked. Beyond it, she corrected. The weeping woman guards the path. They began their descent into the valley, picking their way carefully down the steep slope. The temperature dropped noticeably as they entered the shadows, a chill that seemed to seep through clothing and into bone. Halfway down, Elias paused, a prickle of awareness raising the hairs on the back of his neck. He turned slowly, scanning the ridge they had just descended from. There a flash of movement quickly suppressed, and another further along the ridge. We're being watched, he said quietly to Najoni. At least 2 men on the ridge. She followed his gaze, her body tensing. Locke? Probably T. Elias calculated distances and angles. They must have circled around while we were in the tunnel, coming in from the east instead of following directly. How many? C asked, his voice weak but determined. Can't tell from here. At least 2 on the ridge, but there could be others. A shot suddenly rang out, the bullet kicking up dirt near their feet. More shots followed, forcing them to scramble for the dubious cover of a boulder. They're hurting us, Elias realized as bullets continued to impact around them, never quite hitting, but keeping them pinned. Driving us down into the valley. Why not just kill us? Najoni wondered. Say's face darkened with understanding. Because they still need us. Need you. He looked at his companions grimly. To find the entrance. To get past the Guardians. Then we don't give them what they want, Elias said, checking his rifle. We make a stand here. C shook his head weakly. No, we go to the caves. With them right behind us, Elias protested. We'd be trapped. A smile touched C's fevered face, the first Elias had seen from the stoic warrior. "The caves are never a trap for those the ancestors welcome," he said cryptically. "Trust me, white man. For once in your life, trust an Apache." Elias looked to Najoni, who nodded her agreement. "He's right. Our best chance, our only chance, is to reach the caves before they can catch us." Another volley of shots peppered their position, one bullet ricocheting off the boulder with a whine of protest. Decision time. "All right," Elias conceded. "We run for it. I'll provide covering fire while you two get a head start." "No," Najoni said firmly. "We stay together." She glanced at C's weakened state. "We'll need your strength to get him there." Elias wanted to argue but knew she was right. C could barely stand on his own, let alone run. "On my mark, then," he said, positioning himself to fire uphill. "Ready? Go." He fired several shots toward the ridge, not aiming to hit, but to force their pursuers to take cover. Then he helped Najoni with C, and together they half ran, half stumbled, down the remaining slope into the valley's depths. Bullets followed them, kicking up sprays of dirt and stone, but the shooter's angle made accuracy difficult. By the time they reached the valley floor, the gunfire had ceased, their pursuers, presumably making their own way down to follow. The valley bottom was eerily quiet, the stream's gentle gurgle, the only sound breaking the stillness. Ancient pines grew in twisted shapes, their needles a carpet beneath their feet. The air felt heavy, charged with something Elias couldn't name but could definitely feel an expectant pressure, as if the very atmosphere was awaiting something momentous. "This way," Najoni urged, guiding them toward the far cliff face where the weeping woman watched with her endless tears. As they moved deeper into the valley, a fog began to rise from the ground, curling around their ankles, then their knees. Within minutes, visibility had dropped to mere yards, the mist thickening until the world beyond arm's reach became indistinct shadows. "Stay close," Najoni warned. "It's easy to become lost here." Elias felt it, the disorienting effect of the mist, the way landmarks seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Only Najoni moved with confidence, navigating by signs or instincts he couldn't perceive. Behind them, shouts echoed as their pursuers entered the fog. Commands to stay together, curses of frustration as the mist confounded them. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere impossible to pinpoint. "The fog," Elias realized. "It's protecting us. The ancestors protect their own." C murmured, his voice fading as his strength ebbed further. "The valley knows." The Apache warrior's knees buckled suddenly. Elias caught him before he could fall, alarmed at the heat radiating from C's body. The infection had taken firm hold, sending him into the delirium of high fever. "He can't go much further," Elias told Najoni. "We need to reach the caves now." She nodded, face set with determination. "We're close. The entrance is just beyond that outcropping." She pointed to a dark shape looming in the mist ahead. As they approached, the fog parted just enough to reveal the base of the cliff, where the weeping woman's tears created a small, clear pool. The rock face appeared solid with no visible opening. "I don't see an entrance," Elias said, scanning the cliff. Najoni carefully lowered C to the ground beside the pool, then removed the stone talisman from around her neck. "Watch," she instructed, dipping the stone into the pool. The water rippled, then stilled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like an image emerging in a developing photograph, symbols appeared on the rock face, ancient pictographs glowing with a faint blue luminescence. Najoni placed her hand on one of the symbols, and a section of the cliff face shimmered, revealing an opening that had been perfectly concealed. "The Guardian's Path," she said, her voice hushed with reverence. "Beyond lies the place where ancestors rest." Elias stared in astonishment. Whatever rational explanation might exist for what he was witnessing escaped him completely. He helped lift C, who had now lapsed into unconsciousness, and together they carried him through the hidden entrance. Inside a narrow tunnel, sloped gently downward, illuminated by the same ethereal blue glow that had revealed the entrance. The air was cool but not cold and held a subtle fragrance. Elias couldn't identify, something ancient and clean. They had gone perhaps 50 yards when voices echoed from behind them. Locke's men had found the pool. "They won't see the entrance," Najoni assured him, though her pace quickened. "Not without the stone." "You're sure?" A scream from outside answered his question, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly. Then another and another, the sounds of men encountering something beyond their comprehension. "What's happening to them?" Elias asked, disturbed despite himself. The guardians protect the sacred, Najoni replied. Those who come with darkness in their hearts find darkness waiting for them. They continued deeper into the earth, the tunnel widening gradually until it opened into a vast chamber that took Elias's breath away. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadows despite the blue glow that emanated from the walls. Stalactites hung like stone daggers matched by stalagmites rising from the floor. And everywhere on walls, ceiling, floor were paintings, carving symbols recording the history and knowledge of the Apache people. But what drew Elias's eye most was the center of the chamber, where a pool of water larger than the one outside reflected the ghostly light. Around it stood stone figures, not statues carved by human hands, but natural formations that uncannily resembled human forms, as if the earth itself had grown them from the cave floor. The ancestors, Najoni said softly, guiding them toward the pool. They will help him. They laid Si beside the pool's edge. His breathing had grown shallow, his skin gray beneath its natural copper hue. The infection was winning. Najoni knelt beside him, dipping her hands into the pool. The water clung to her fingers like liquid silver as she pressed them to Si's wounds, singing softly in Apache, a melody that seemed to resonate with the cave itself, echoing back from unseen depths. Will this heal him? Elias asked, uncertain whether to believe in the powers Najoni claimed existed here. If the ancestors will it, she replied without looking up from her task. His spirit is strong, but his body weakens. As Elias watched, something extraordinary began to happen. The blue glow intensified around them, pulsing in rhythm with Najoni's song. The water on Si's wound seemed to move of its own accord, spreading across the infected area, drawing out darkness like ink pulled from cloth. Si's back arched suddenly, a gasp escaping his lips. His eyes flew open, but they were not seeing the cave. They were seeing something else, something that made him cry out in his native tongue. Najoni continued, her singing, tears streaming down her face as she worked. So focused were they on Si's transformation that neither noticed the figure emerging from a side tunnel until his voice shattered the ancient silence. Impressive, Raymond Locke said, stepping into the chamber, with a revolver trained steadily on Najoni. Native mumbo-jumbo and a little phosphorescence. No wonder Holloway lost his mind over this place. Elias reached for his rifle, but Locke's gun swiveled to cover him. I wouldn't, the man warned. I'd hate to damage any of these fascinating artifacts with your blood. Raymond Locke was not what Elias had expected. Instead of the rough-hewn frontier businessman, he had imagined, Locke was refined, almost aristocratic, in bearing silver-haired, impeccably dressed, despite the journey with the cold eyes of a predator, accustomed to getting what he wanted. How did you find the entrance? Najoni demanded, her song halted mid-verse. Locke smiled thinly. I had help. He gestured, and another figure emerged from the tunnel behind him. Elias felt Najoni stiffen beside him as recognition dawned. The newcomer was Apache, an older man with a deeply lined face and eyes that refused to meet theirs. Chateau, Najoni whispered, her voice breaking with betrayal. Why? The old Apache looked at the floor, shame evident in every line of his body. He has my grandsons, he said simply, at his ranch, working in conditions no better than slavery. He promised to free them if I let him here. And you believed him. Si's voice was weak but clear. His consciousness apparently returned during the exchange. Chateau had no answer for that. Locke surveyed the chamber with proprietary interest. Quite a discovery, he remarked. Worth far more than I anticipated, I suspect. Not just the mineral rights, but the archaeological value alone. He gestured at the symbols covering the walls. Universities would pay fortunes for access. This place is sacred, Najoni protested. It belongs to the Apache. My dear girl, nothing belongs to the Apache anymore, Locke replied with patronizing patience. Your people lost that right when they were defeated. This land, everything on it and under it, belongs to progress now, to the future. Your future, Elias observed. Naturally. Locke's cold gaze assessed him. You're the bounty hunter who's been causing my men so much trouble. Elias Boone, if I'm not mistaken. You are not. A long way from Santa Fe, Mr. Boone. A pity you won't be returning. Locke's revolver shifted, taking aim at Elias's heart. Nothing personal, you understand. Just business. As his finger tightened on the trigger, a low rumble began beneath their feet. The blue glow pulsed more rapidly, and the water in the pool began to ripple, though no wind disturbed its surface. Locke faltered, glancing around in momentary confusion. It was all the opening Elias needed. He launched himself sideways, colliding with Najoni and C, bringing them all down behind the protection of one of the stone ancestors as Locke's shot cracked through the chamber. The rumbling intensified, stalactites shivering overhead. Dust and small stones began to rain down from the ceiling. "What's happening?" Locke demanded, his composure cracking. Chatto's eyes widened with understanding and fear. "The ancestors wake," he said, backing toward the tunnel. "They protect their own." A larger tremor shook the cave, sending Locke staggering. The pool's surface churned now, as if boiling, the blue glow brightening to an almost painful intensity. "Get out," Chatto cried, turning to flee. Before, his warning was cut short as a massive stalactite broke free from the ceiling, plummeting toward the center of the chamber. Elias didn't see if it struck anyone. He was fully occupied with shielding his companions from falling debris as the cave seemed to tear itself apart around them. Through the chaos, he heard Najoni resume her singing, the melody somehow cutting through the cacophony of breaking stone and rumbling earth. The stone figure they sheltered behind began to warm, as if coming alive beneath Elias's touch. "What's happening?" he shouted over the din. Najoni's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "The caves defend themselves," she replied. "And us." A scream echoed through the chamber. Locke or Chatto Elias couldn't tell which. Then another tremor, stronger than any before, and the sound of rushing water. The pool had overflowed its banks, the silvery liquid flowing with purpose toward the tunnel entrance. As Elias watched in disbelief, the water rose up like a living thing, forming a barrier across the opening. Beyond it, he caught a glimpse of Locke, face contorted with rage and terror, firing his revolver uselessly at the liquid wall before him. The bullets passed through without effect, splashing into the stone beyond. Then the ceiling gave way completely, tons of rock crashing down to seal the entrance forever. The last Elias saw of Raymond Locke was the man's expression of dawning comprehension that some forces could not be bought, controlled, or defeated, not with money, not with guns, not with all the power of the changing world outside. As suddenly as it had begun, the trembling stopped. The blue glow dimmed to a softer radiance. The pool returned to its placid state. In the sudden silence, C's voice sounded unnaturally loud. "The ancestors have judged," he said. His hand, when Elias looked down, no longer bore any sign of infection or wound. The skin was smooth, unmarked, as if he had never been shot at all. "Are we trapped?" Elias asked, surveying the sealed tunnel entrance. Najoni shook her head. "There is another way out, the true path." She helped Elias to his feet, his strength apparently restored. "The ancestors would not save us only to entomb us." "And Chatto?" Elias asked, searching for the betrayer's body among the rubble. "He made his choice," she said harshly. "Let the ancestors judge him." Najoni touched the stone figure that had protected them, her fingers tracing the weathered surface with reverence. "Thank you, grandfather," she whispered. As they gathered themselves to find this other exit, Elias realized that whatever rational explanations he might have clung to had crumbled along with the cave ceiling. He had witnessed something beyond his understanding today, something that defied the orderly world of cause and effect he had always believed in. "The power you spoke of," he said to Najoni, "it's real. As real as the earth beneath your feet," she confirmed, "as real as the air you breathe. The ancestors are not gone, Elias Boone. They are merely waiting, watching, or protecting what remains of our ways." C, fully recovered, now studied Elias with a new expression, not quite acceptance, but no longer open hostility. "You have seen," he said simply. "Now you understand why these places must remain hidden from your kind." Elias nodded slowly. "Yes," he agreed, "I understand." As they prepared to follow Najoni deeper into the caves, seeking the true path out, Elias cast one last glance at the sealed tunnel where Raymond Locke had met his fate. The man had represented everything Elias had once been, part of the relentless march of civilization over native lands, cultures, beliefs. The certainty that progress justified any cost. Now standing amid the ancient power of the place where ancestors rest, Elias finally understood the magnitude of what was being lost and what perhaps he could still help preserve. The deeper chambers of the cave system stretched before them, like the veins of a living being pulsing with the same ethereal blue light that had guided their entry. Elias followed Najoni and C through passages that seemed to shift and change even as they traversed them, creating the unsettling impression that the cave itself was alive, consciously deciding their path. How do you know where to go? Elias asked, his voice hushed in the ancient silence. Najoni touched the stone walls as they walked, her fingers tracing symbols invisible to Elias's eyes. The ancestors leave signs for those who can read them. C moved with renewed vigor, his miraculous healing apparently complete. The Apache warrior's demeanor had changed subtly since the confrontation with Locke. He walked with reverent purpose, now occasionally murmuring words in his native tongue, prayers or thanks, Elias couldn't tell which. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when the passage widened suddenly into another chamber, smaller than the first, but no less awe-inspiring. Here the blue glow emanated primarily from crystals embedded in the walls, countless shards that caught and amplified the light, scattering it like stars in a midnight sky. In the center of this chamber stood a circle of stone pedestals, each bearing an object: a bow, an intricately woven basket, a medicine pouch, clay vessels decorated with geometric patterns, a warrior's headdress. Around the pedestals, the floor was inlaid with a spiral pattern that led to the circle's center, where a fire pit contained ashes so ancient they had turned to stone. A council chamber, Najoni explained, her voice dropping to a whisper, where the great leaders of all Apache bands once gathered in times of need. Elias gazed at the artifacts, understanding their immeasurable historical value. Museums would pay fortunes for such pristine examples of native craftsmanship and culture. Yet here they remained undisturbed for generations, serving their original purpose, rather than becoming curiosities behind glass. C approached one of the pedestals, the one bearing the warrior's headdress, and knelt before it, head bowed. After a moment of silent communion, he rose and turned to Elias. "My father's father was a great war chief," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of openness. "He sat in this circle, wore this headdress, spoke for our people when the first soldiers came." His eyes held Elias's. "He counseled peace, understanding, believed your people could be reasoned with." The unspoken conclusion hung between them: he had been wrong. "I'm sorry, Baum." Elias said, the words inadequate but sincere. C nodded once, accepting the apology for what it was. Then he turned to Najoni. "We should not linger here. The way out lies beyond." They passed through the council chamber and into yet another tunnel, this one sloping gradually upward. The air grew fresher as they progressed, suggesting they were approaching the surface. Eventually, the blue glow began to fade, replaced by a different quality of light, natural daylight filtering from somewhere ahead. The tunnel ended at a seemingly solid rock face. Najoni approached it confidently, placing her palm against the stone. Unlike the dramatic opening at the Weeping Woman entrance, this exit revealed itself with subtle grace, the rock face simply becoming transparent, then insubstantial, allowing them to step through onto a small ledge overlooking a hidden valley. Elias emerged last, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight. They stood high on a cliff face, a natural path leading down to a verdant valley nestled between protective peaks. A crystal-clear lake occupied the valley's center, fed by numerous streams cascading from the surrounding heights. Along its shores stood a small village of traditional Apache wickiups, with people moving about their daily tasks. Children played near the water's edge while elders sat in the shade of ancient pines. "Gray Bear's people," Najoni explained, relief evident in her voice. "They reached the sanctuary safely." C scanned the village, his posture relaxing as he spotted familiar faces. "And Kinalda is with them," he added, pointing to where the young girl sat with a group of elders, apparently deep in conversation. Elias studied the hidden valley with the tactical eye of a former military officer. The single visible approach was a narrow pass to the north, easily defended by a handful of warriors. The high cliffs provided vantage points to spot anyone approaching from miles away. Water game and edible plants were plentiful. It was a perfect refuge, one that could sustain the Apache indefinitely if necessary. "Your people could stay here," he observed, "safe from Locke, from the army, from everything outside." Najoni shook her head sadly. "For a time, perhaps. But the world beyond these mountains grows smaller every day. Railways, telegraphs, more settlers. Eventually, even this place would be found." She gazed at the peaceful scene below. "Besides, we were not meant to hide forever. Apache are proud people meant to live under open skies, to move with the seasons." "Then what will you do?" Before she could answer, a shout from below alerted the village to their presence. Figures began moving toward the path that led up to their ledge, Kinaalda, in the lead, running with the boundless energy of youth. The reunion was joyous. Kinalda threw herself into her sister's arms, speaking rapidly in Apache. Gray Bear followed more sedately, embracing his son with dignified emotion. Others gathered around, expressing relief and asking questions about what had transpired. Elias hung back, acutely aware of his outsider status. Eventually, Gray Bear approached him, his weathered face solemn but not unwelcoming. "My son tells me you fought bravely," the old chief said, "that you helped protect the sacred caves." "I did what was right," Elias replied simply. Gray Bear studied him with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "Few white men know what is right when it comes to Apache ways." He gestured toward a large wickiup at the village's center. "Come, the council will wish to hear what happened." Sam. The council meeting lasted well into the evening. Seated around a central fire in the spacious wickiup, Elias listened as C and Najoni recounted their journey, the confrontation with Locke, and the cave's supernatural defense. The assembled elders, men and women of various ages, all bearing the dignity of leadership, asked occasional questions, but mostly listened in grave silence. When the tale was complete, an elderly woman spoke. Her face was deeply lined, her silver hair worn in traditional braids, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. "The ancestors have spoken clearly," she said, her voice carrying surprising strength. "The caves must be sealed permanently. The knowledge they contain is too dangerous in the wrong hands." "But grandmother," Najoni objected, "that knowledge belongs to our people. It is our heritage, our history." "And what good is history to a people with no future?" the old woman countered. "If the white men find the caves again, they will destroy everything. Better the knowledge sleeps safely than dies forever." A murmur of agreement passed through the assembly. Gray Bear nodded thoughtfully. "Grandmother Reed speaks wisdom. The world changes around us. What protected our ancestors may not protect our children." See, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "There is another way." All eyes turned to him, a way to preserve the knowledge without risking its discovery. "Explain, my son," Gray Bear encouraged. "The symbols on the cave walls, the stories they tell, these can be transferred to other forms. Hides, cloth, even the white man's paper." C's voice grew passionate. "We can create copies hidden separately, entrusted to different families. If one is lost or destroyed, others will survive." "That would take years," an elder objected. "Then we take years," C replied firmly. "What is time against the survival of our ways?" The council fell into discussion, weighing options and risks. Elias remained silent, knowing this decision was not his to influence. He found himself admiring the thoughtfulness of their deliberation. No hasty judgments, no domineering voices, just a community seeking consensus on a matter of vital importance. Eventually, Gray Bear raised a hand for silence. "We will consider C's proposal. Those with the skill to copy the sacred symbols will begin when the moon is next full." He looked around the circle. "In the meantime, we must decide our more immediate future. We cannot remain in this valley indefinitely." "The reservation at San Carlos," one elder began, "is a death camp," another interrupted. "Disease, starvation, the soldiers' cruelty." "But what choice do we have?" the first responded. "Where else can Apache go now?" An unexpected voice entered the conversation. Kinalda, who had been sitting silently beside her sister, suddenly spoke. "The high country to the north, beyond the territory line." All eyes turned to the young girl in surprise. Children did not typically speak in council unless invited. "Explain, little sister," Gray Bear said gently, showing no offense at her breach of protocol. Kinalda's voice grew more confident. "I dreamed of a place 3 nights ago. A valley like this one, but larger, with a forest of tall pines and a river that runs cold even in summer. Game is plentiful there. The land remembers Apache feet from long ago." The elders exchanged glances. Dreams held special significance in Apache culture, particularly from one with Kinalda's gifts. "Where is this place?" Grandmother Reed asked. "I can feel it," Kinalda replied, touching her stone talisman. "The earth will guide us there." Gray Bear nodded slowly. "Perhaps the ancestors show us a new path." He turned to Elias, including him in the conversation for the first time. "You know the territories to our north. Is there such a place as the girl describes?" Elias considered the question carefully. "There are valleys in the high country beyond the territorial line that match that description. Areas rarely visited by white settlers, too remote for most." He hesitated, then added honestly, But nowhere is truly safe anymore. The railroads push further every year. Mining companies search every mountain for ore. Even the most distant places will eventually be found. Then we need more than a hidden valley, Najoni said, her mind working through the problem. We need protection under the white man's law. A reservation? Graybear asked skeptically. No, a treaty. Najoni turned to Elias. Is it possible a treaty that guarantees our land that cannot be taken away? Elias wished he could offer hope, but his experiences had taught him bitter lessons about the government's treatment of native peoples. Treaties have been made before, he said carefully, and broken just as often when gold or silver is discovered or when settlers want the land. But not always, Najoni pressed. Some treaties are honored. Some, Elias acknowledged, usually when the land has no value to whites or when those who sign the treaty have powerful friends in Washington. A thoughtful silence fell over the council. Finally, Graybear spoke. We will consider all paths before us. Tomorrow we will decide which to follow. He gestured to Elias. You have shared our council fire and spoken true words. You are welcome to rest here tonight. The council dispersed, leaving Elias with mixed emotions. These people had welcomed him, trusted him with their sacred places and deliberations. Yet he felt helpless to offer them any real hope for the future. The bitter truth was that the forces of progress he had once served would eventually reach even this hidden valley. Outside the council wickiup, the night air was cool and crisp, stars blazing overhead in numbers rarely seen in more settled areas. Elias found a quiet spot away from the main encampment and sat his back against a pine tree, contemplating the day's extraordinary events. He had witnessed things that defied rational explanation. The caves, the healing pool, the living stone, all challenged his understanding of the world. Yet he could not deny the evidence of his own eyes. There were forces at work beyond those recognized by civilized science powers connected intimately to the land and its original people. Troubled thoughts, Najoni's voice came from nearby. She approached and sat beside him, close but not touching. Many, Elias admitted. I've seen things today that I can't explain. Do all things need explanation? He considered this. I was taught so. That understanding comes from breaking things down, categorizing them, finding their mechanism. Najoni smiled in the starlight. And if some things resist being broken down, if they exist only as wholes, not parts, then my education is inadequate, Elias replied honestly. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. Around them, the hidden valley settled into night rhythms, soft conversations from nearby wickiups, the occasional laugh of children, not yet asleep, the distant call of a night bird. What will you do now? Najoni asked eventually. Return to your bounty hunting. The question echoed her earlier inquiry, but this time Elias had an answer. No, he said with a quiet certainty. That life is finished for me. And what will take its place? Elias gazed at the starlit valley, an idea taking shape in his mind. Perhaps I could help your people, he said slowly. Not by fighting, there's been enough of that, but by speaking for you to those who might listen. Najoni turned to him, surprised. You would do this, because it's right, Elias said simply, and because I've spent too many years on the wrong side of right. Before she could respond, a commotion arose from the valley's northern edge. Warriors were gathering, weapons in hand. Graybear emerged from his wickiup, calling for silence. Elias and Najoni hurried toward the disturbance. A scout was reporting to Graybear, his words coming fast and urgent in Apache. What is it? Elias asked Najoni. Riders approaching the valley pass, she translated grimly. Many riders, armed. Impossible, Elias protested. Locke is dead. His men wouldn't continue without him. Not Locke, C said, joining them with bow in hand. Soldiers, a full cavalry company. Cold dread settled in Elias's stomach. How did they find this place? Graybear's expression was grim. That matters less than what they will do now that they have. He turned to his warriors. Prepare defenses at the pass. We must protect the women and children. Wait, Elias interjected. Let me speak to them first. If it comes to fighting, your people won't stand a chance against a cavalry company. Better to die free than live as prisoners, C declared. No one needs to die, Elias insisted, or be imprisoned. Let me try. Graybear studied him intently. You would stand between your people and mine. I would stand for what's right, Elias replied, meeting his gaze steadily. After a long moment, the old chief nodded. Go, But know this: if they come with violence in their hearts, they will find it waiting for them. Elias rode out alone on a borrowed horse, unarmed, except for a white cloth tied to a branch, the universal signal for parley. The narrow pass that served as the valley's only conventional entrance wound between sheer rock walls for nearly half a mile before opening onto a wider plateau. It was there he encountered the cavalry. They were indeed a full company, at least 60 mounted soldiers in neat formation, led by an officer Elias recognized instantly despite the decade that had passed since they'd last met. Captain Thomas Jeffords, now wearing a major's insignia, had served with Elias during the early Apache campaigns. Unlike many officers, Jeffords had earned a reputation for fair dealing with native peoples, even learning several tribal languages. "Major Jeffords," Elias called, bringing his mount to a halt 20 yards from the cavalry line. Jeffords urged his horse forward, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Captain Boone, by God, is that you?" "Oh." He signaled his men to hold position and rode closer. "Last I heard, you'd turned bounty hunter after Sand Creek." "And last I heard, you'd been appointed Indian agent for the Chiricahua," Elias replied. "What brings an Indian agent and a cavalry company to this remote location?" Jeffords dismounted, signaling Elias to do the same. When they stood face to face, the major's expression turned serious. "Official business, I'm afraid. We're looking for a group of Apache who left the San Carlos reservation without permission, led by one called Gray Bear." He studied Elias curiously, "Though I'm more interested in why Elias Boone is acting as their representative." "It's a long story," Elias said. "One I'm happy to share, but first, what are your intentions toward these people?" Jeffords glanced toward the pass behind Elias. "My orders are to return them to the reservation, peacefully if possible. And if not possible," the major's face tightened. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I've had my fill of blood." Elias believed him. Jeffords had always been one of the rare officers who viewed the Apache as people rather than obstacles. "There's something you should know before you proceed," he said. "Raymond Locke is dead." Jeffords's eyebrows rose. "The land speculator. What has he to do with this?" "Everything." Elias proceeded to outline the events of the past days: Locke's pursuit of the Apache for their sacred knowledge, his use of mercenaries, his death in the caves. He omitted the supernatural elements, focusing instead on Locke's illegal activities and the Apache's legitimate defense of their sacred sites. When he finished, Jeffords looked troubled. "That's quite a tale. Locke had powerful friends in Santa Fe. They won't be pleased." "Locke was breaking numerous laws," Elias pointed out, "employing armed men to attack peaceful natives, attempted kidnapping, trespassing on sacred grounds." "All true," Jeffords acknowledged. "But in these times, the law often looks different when applied to Indians versus white men." He sighed heavily. "Still, I have some discretion in how I execute my orders." Meaning I need to report that I found the missing Apache. But perhaps," he trailed off thinking. Elias sensed an opening. "Gray Bear's people don't want to return to San Carlos. They've seen too much death there. They're seeking a new home farther north." "Outside my jurisdiction," Jeffords mused. "Exactly. And if they had an advocate, someone who could help establish a legal claim to land under a proper treaty," Jeffords studied him with new understanding. "You're proposing to help them resettle legally, become their advocate?" Elias nodded. "It's time I used what I know about the system to help those the system has failed." The major paced a few steps, considering. "It could work, with the right connections in Washington, the right arguments." He turned back to Elias. "But it would take time. And in the meantime, I still have orders. What if you could report that you found them, convinced them to relocate, and are personally overseeing their move to a more suitable location?" Elias suggested. "Technically, you'd be fulfilling your orders while giving us time to establish a legal claim." "Us," Jeffords raised an eyebrow. "I've chosen my side," Elias said simply. The major studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The man I knew a decade ago wouldn't have stood here arguing for Apache rights. I'm glad to see some changes are for the better." He extended his hand. "I'll help where I can, Boone, but this won't be easy. There are powerful interests who want all Indians confined to reservations regardless of conditions." "I know," Elias acknowledged, clasping the offered hand, "but these people deserve better. All of them do." They worked out the details quickly. Jeffords would report that he had located Gray Bear's band and was escorting them north to join relatives already settled peacefully. This would buy them time, perhaps a month, perhaps more, to reach the valley Kinalda had dreamed of and begin establishing their claim. "I'll send word to contacts in Washington," Jeffords promised, "people who might support a new treaty's approach, and I'll delay further pursuit as long as possible." "Thank you," Elias said sincerely. As they prepared to part ways, Jeffords asked the question that had clearly been bothering him. "What happened at the caves, Boone, really?" Elias thought of the blue glow, the healing pool, the living stone. "Some things defy explanation, Major. Let's just say I've learned that the Apache understand this land in ways we never will." He mounted his borrowed horse. "And some knowledge is best left in their keeping." Elias returned to the valley with news that was received with cautious optimism. The council reconvened immediately, weighing Jeffords' proposal against other options. "Can this man be trusted?" Gray Bear asked. "As much as any white officer can be," Elias replied honestly. "Jeffords has a reputation for fair dealing with the Apache. He was Cochise's friend in the last years of his life." This information clearly carried weight. Cochise, the legendary Chiricahua leader, was respected even by bands that had sometimes disagreed with his policies. And this plan to seek new lands with a treaty, Grandmother Reed asked skeptically, "can such a thing succeed?" "It won't be easy," Elias admitted, "but it's possible. There are people in Washington who believe the current reservation system is flawed. With the right approach, the right story." He looked at Najoni, then Kinalda. "These people might listen." The council deliberated through the night. By dawn, they had reached their decision. They would travel north, seeking the valley of Kinalda's vision, while Elias would work to secure legal protection for their new home. It was a gamble, but one that offered more hope than returning to San Carlos or living forever in hiding. Preparations for departure began immediately. The Apache were accustomed to moving efficiently, packing only what was necessary, leaving no trace of their presence. By midday, the hidden valley showed almost no sign that humans had ever dwelled there. As the band prepared to move out, Elias found himself standing apart, watching the organized chaos of departure. His path forward was clear now, yet fraught with uncertainty. The legal and political battles ahead would make facing Locke's guns seem straightforward by comparison. "Having doubts?" Najoni asked, approaching silently. "Concerns," Elias corrected. "The system is stacked against your people. Even with the best intentions, I may fail." "And then we fail together," she said simply. "But first we try." Her quiet confidence steadied him. This woman had lost everything, parents' home, way of life, yet still found strength to fight for a future. How could he do less? "There's something I need to do before we leave." Elias said, a decision crystallizing in his mind. "Something I should have done long ago." Najoni tilted her head questioningly. "I need to make peace with my past," he explained. "Truly let it go if I'm to be of any use in building a different future." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "The sacred pool in the caves." Elias nodded. "If it would be permitted?" "I will speak with Gray Bear," she said. "Wait here." She returned shortly with the chief and Grandmother Reed. The old woman studied Elias with penetrating eyes that seemed to reach into his soul. "You seek cleansing," she stated rather than asked. "I seek forgiveness," Elias replied carefully. "From myself, if no one else." "The pool does not grant forgiveness," Grandmother Reed said sternly. "It reveals truth. Are you prepared for what it might show you?" The warning gave Elias pause, but he nodded. "I am." Gray Bear exchanged glances with the old woman, then made a decision. "Najoni will guide you, but you must return before sundown. We cannot delay our departure." The return to the caves was made through the exit they had used the previous day, avoiding the sealed main entrance. The blue glow welcomed them as they entered, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. They made their way directly to the central chamber, where the healing pool still shimmered with its mysterious light. Najoni led Elias to the pool's edge, then stepped back. "You must enter alone," she instructed, "with an open heart and mind. The ancestors will do the rest." Elias removed his boots and outer clothing, then stepped into the pool. The water was neither warm nor cold, but seemed to change temperature as it touched his skin, sometimes cool as mountain snow, sometimes warm as desert sand. He waded deeper until the water reached his chest, then following an instinct he didn't understand, submerged himself completely. Beneath the surface, the world transformed. The blue glow intensified, surrounding him with light that somehow carried images within it. He saw scenes from his past play out before him, his enlistment in the army filled with youthful idealism, his gradual hardening as the realities of frontier warfare corrupted that idealism. The orders he followed that led to Apache villages burned families, displaced children, orphaned, and then Sand Creek. Though he hadn't participated in the massacre, he saw it now through the eyes of those who had suffered. There felt their terror, their confusion, their despair. The emotions crashed over him like physical blows, driving the breath from his lungs. Just as he thought he might drown in the weight of these memories, the vision shifted. He saw the small acts of kindness he had performed along the way. The Apache child he had saved from starvation after her village was destroyed. The prisoner he had secretly provided water when others denied it. His resignation from the army rather than continue participating in campaigns he knew were wrong. These moments didn't balance the scales, nothing could, but they suggested a capacity for change, for growth, for choosing a different path. When Elias finally emerged from the pool, gasping for air, he found Najoni waiting exactly where he had left her, though it felt as if hours had passed. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. "Everything," he replied, voice rough with emotion. "Everything I was, everything I could become." He looked at her with new clarity. The ancestors didn't offer forgiveness. "No," she agreed, "that is not their gift to give. But they offered understanding, and perhaps purpose." Elias stepped from the pool, surprised to find his clothes and skin already dry, as if the water had simply evaporated. "I know what I need to do now." As they prepared to leave the cave, Elias turned for one last look at the chamber that had changed him so profoundly. The blue glow pulsed once brighter than before, as if in acknowledgement or farewell. Outside, the day was waning, the sun beginning its descent toward the western peaks. Gray Bear's people would be ready to depart, beginning their journey north toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in a decade, Elias Boone felt the weight of his past lifting from his shoulders. Not erased, never that, but transformed into something he could carry without being crushed by it. "Are you ready?" Najoni asked as they started down the path that would lead them back to the valley. Elias took a deep breath of the clear mountain air, feeling it fill his lungs with new purpose. "Yes," he said, "I believe I am." What lay ahead would test them all: the physical journey north, the political battles in distant Washington, the challenge of preserving a way of life while adapting to a changing world. But in this moment, standing between the sacred caves behind him and the waiting Apache before him, Elias understood that he had finally found his true path. The road to redemption stretched before him, difficult but clear, and he would walk it one step at a time alongside people who had every reason to reject him, but had chosen instead to accept his help. In that acceptance lay the seed of something he had thought lost: forever hope. As they rejoined Gray Bear's band and began their northward journey, Kinaalda fell into step beside Elias. The young girl looked up at him with those fathomless eyes that seemed to see beyond the visible world. "The ancestors have touched you," she observed. "I can see their mark upon you now." "Is that good or bad?" Elias asked, curious about her perception. A small smile touched her lips. "It means you belong to this story now. Our story." She touched her stone talisman, then unexpectedly reached out to take his hand. "The path ahead is long, but you will not walk it alone." From anyone else, the words might have sounded like simple encouragement. But coming from this child with her mysterious connection to forces beyond his understanding, they carried the weight of prophecy. As the Apache band moved north away from the lands they had known toward an uncertain future, Elias felt something he had not experienced since before the war: the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. And for now, that was enough. Autumn painted the high country in gold and crimson as Gray Bear's band moved steadily northward. 2 weeks had passed since they'd left the hidden valley, traveling along game trails and ancient Apache pathways that few white men knew existed. They moved primarily at night, resting during daylight hours in concealed camps that left minimal trace of their passage. Elias rode alongside Gray Bear at the front of their procession, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The old chief had accepted him as an advisor of sorts, often seeking his knowledge of white settlements and military outposts they needed to avoid. "How much farther to the territorial line?" Gray Bear asked as they paused atop a ridge, surveying the landscape spread before them. Elias studied the distant mountains, comparing them to the mental map he'd constructed during his years as a bounty hunter. 3 days, maybe 4 if we continue this pace. Once we cross, we'll be beyond the jurisdiction of the New Mexico territorial government. And the soldiers? The cavalry rarely ventures that far north unless pursuing hostiles, Elias replied. With Jeffords covering our trail, we should be safe from immediate pursuit. Gray Bear nodded thoughtfully. Behind them, the band of 47 Apache men, women, and children were setting up their temporary camp with practiced efficiency. Though they carried only what was absolutely necessary, they had maintained remarkable spirits throughout the journey. Even the elders, like Grandmother Reed, showed a resilience that humbled Elias. "The girl has been restless," Gray Bear observed, nodding toward where Kinalda stood, slightly apart from the others. Her face turned northward, one small hand resting on her stone talisman. "The valley calls to her." Elias had noticed it too, Kinalda's increasing excitement as they moved closer to their destination. The young girl had become their guide, in a sense sometimes suggesting changes to their route based on instincts she couldn't fully explain, but which Gray Bear trusted implicitly. "Will we know this valley when we find it?" Elias asked. "There are many valleys in the high country." "We will know," Gray Bear assured him. "The ancestors guide her footsteps." As they made their way back to camp, Najoni approached carrying a small bundle of herbs she'd gathered during their journey. In the 2 weeks of travel, she had become Elias's closest companion, teaching him Apache words and customs, while he shared his knowledge of the legal and political systems they would soon have to navigate. "The scouts have returned," she informed them, falling into step beside Elias. "They report a trading post 2 days ahead, just south of the territorial line." Gray Bear frowned. "Can we avoid it?" "They say it sits directly in our path at the only passable canyon for many miles." Elias considered this development. A trading post might mean trappers, prospectors, possibly even a telegraph line. News of Locke's disappearance has surely reached Santa Fe by now. "Will they be looking for us?" Najoni asked. "For someone," Elias confirmed grimly. "Locke had powerful friends. They won't let his disappearance go uninvestigated." Gray Bear's weathered face showed no fear, only a calm acceptance of yet another obstacle. "Then we must pass without being seen, or pass in a way that raises no suspicion." An idea began to form in Elias's mind. "Or perhaps we use this to our advantage." Both Apache looked at him questioningly. "If I ride ahead to the trading post, I can gather information, find out what's known about Locke, whether there are search parties, what route might be safest." He hesitated, then added, "I could also send a telegraph to some contacts who might help with our treaty negotiations. The sooner we start that process, the better our chances." Gray Bear exchanged a look with Najoni, silent communication passing between them. Finally, the chief nodded. "It is wise, but dangerous for you." "I'll be careful," Elias promised. "One former soldier passing through a trading post won't raise suspicions." "I will accompany you," Najoni declared firmly. Elias started to object, but she raised a hand to stop him. "Not to the post itself. I will wait nearby. If trouble comes, you may need warning or help." Her determination was clear, and truthfully, Elias welcomed her company. They had grown close during their journey, their initial wariness gradually transforming into a deep mutual respect. Sometimes when they sat together during the evening meals, their hands would brush accidentally, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection neither was quite ready to name. "We leave at first light," Gray Bear decided. "The rest of us will continue north, but more slowly, giving you time to rejoin us beyond the trading post." As they made their way back to the main camp, Sea approached. The younger warrior had maintained a cautious acceptance of Elias since their experience in the caves, neither fully trusting nor openly hostile. "The children found something," he said without preamble, gesturing for them to follow. He led them to where several Apache children stood gathered around a small cairn of stones just off their path. The structure was clearly man-made, 7 stones arranged in a specific pattern that meant nothing to Elias but clearly held significance for the Apache. "Trail sign," Gray Bear explained, kneeling to examine it. "Apache passing. Recently." "Your people?" Elias asked. The old chief shook his head. "Not from San Carlos. The pattern is different. Northern bands, perhaps." "Jicarilla or Mescalero," Najoni suggested. "Possible." Gray Bear adjusted one of the stones slightly, then added another from his pocket. "I have left our mark. If they are friends, they will know we pass in peace, Wasam." The discovery added an element of uncertainty to their journey. Other Apache in these mountains could be potential allies or complications if they were hostile to outsiders or worse, working with the army as scouts. That night, as the camp settled into sleep, Elias found himself unable to rest. He sat at the edge of their perimeter, watching the star-filled sky and contemplating the challenges that lay ahead. The trading post represented their first real contact with the outside world since leaving the hidden valley and their first real risk of discovery. "You should sleep." Najoni's voice came softly from behind him. "Tomorrow will require clear thinking." She settled beside him, wrapping her blanket more tightly against the mountain chill. "Too many thoughts," Elias admitted. "Too many possibilities to consider." "You cannot control what has not yet happened," she observed. "That is a white man's sickness, always living in tomorrow instead of today." Elias smiled at her gentle rebuke. "A sickness I've had for many years, I'm afraid." They sat in companionable silence for a time, the night sounds of the forest surrounding them. An owl called from a nearby pine, its haunting voice echoing through the darkness. "What will you do?" Najoni asked eventually. "After we reach the valley, after the treaty, if it comes, will you stay with us?" The question caught Elias off guard, though he'd asked it of himself many times over the past weeks. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I've spent so long running from what I was, I haven't given much thought to what I might become." "You could be many things," she said softly. "A bridge between worlds, a voice for those who have been silenced, a teacher of the white man's ways to our children so they might navigate the future." The possibilities she outlined stirred something in Elias, a sense of purpose larger than the personal redemption he had sought. "Would your people accept such a role for me?" "Some would," Najoni acknowledged. "Others would need time. Trust is earned slowly when it has been broken so often." "And you," Elias found himself asking, "what would you accept?" In the starlight, he could see her profile as she gazed toward the distant mountains. "I have seen your heart, Elias Boone, in the caves by the pool on this journey. I would accept whatever path you choose, as long as it honors the truth you have found." Her words touched him deeply. Before he could respond, the owl called again, closer this time. Najoni tensed suddenly, her head tilting as she listened. "What is it?" Elias asked, instantly alert. "That is not an owl," she whispered, rising to her feet. "It's a signal." Throughout the camp, Apache warriors were already moving silently to defensive positions, weapons ready. Gray Bear appeared beside them, a rifle in his hands. "From which direction?" he asked Najoni. She pointed northeast toward a stand of pines, darker than the surrounding forest. "There, 3 calls." Gray Bear handed his rifle to Elias. "Cover us," he instructed, then turned to see who had joined them. "We go to meet them. Carefully." The 2 Apache melted into the darkness, moving with a silence born of lifelong practice. Elias and Najoni took positions behind a fallen log, eyes straining to pierce the night. 10 tense minutes passed before Gray Bear's distinctive whistle came from the darkness, the all-clear signal. Moments later, he and C returned, accompanied by 3 figures Elias didn't recognize. "Jicarilla," Najoni whispered to him, "from the north." The newcomers were brought to the center of camp, where a small, shielded fire provided just enough light for counsel. Elias hung back, knowing his presence might complicate matters, but Najoni motioned him forward. "They should know who travels with us," she said. "No secrets between friends." The Jicarilla visitors, 2 men and a woman, all travel-worn but dignified, regarded Elias with understandable suspicion. Gray Bear explained in Apache, then in Spanish for Elias's benefit, that these were scouts from a Jicarilla band that had established a settlement in the northern mountains several years earlier. "They have been watching us for 2 days, Gray Bear said, making sure we were not being pursued or leading soldiers to their people." The oldest of the Jicarilla, a man with silver hair and a deeply lined face, addressed Elias directly in halting English. "Why does this white man travel with Apache? Why do Apache trust him?" Before Elias could answer, Canalda stepped forward from the shadows where she had been listening. To everyone's surprise, she spoke directly to the Jicarilla elder in his own dialect, her young voice carrying a surprising authority. "He walks the path of redemption." She said, the words translated softly by Najoni for Elias's benefit. "The ancestors have marked him. The sacred pool has cleansed him." The Jicarilla exchanged glances, clearly surprised by both the child's boldness and her words. The female visitor approached Kinalda, studying her intently. You carry the stone, she observed, noticing the talisman around the girl's neck. You are K. Nalyehe Harmony speaker. Kinalda nodded solemnly. We have one also, the woman said, turning to Grey Bear. An old grandmother who speaks with the earth. She has seen your coming in her dreams. She sent us to find you. This revelation shifted the atmosphere immediately. What had begun as a cautious encounter transformed into something approaching a reunion. The Jicarilla explained that their band had established a permanent settlement in a fertile valley beyond the territorial line, a place they called Shadow of the Eagles, for the great birds that nested in the cliffs above. It is the valley from my dream, Kinalda confirmed, her eyes shining with certainty. The Jicarilla elder, who introduced himself as Standing Elk, described how their band had created a unique arrangement with territorial authorities after years of conflict. Through a combination of strategic alliances, demonstrated peaceful intentions, and the fortuitous support of a sympathetic Indian agent, they had secured a form of recognized land claim, not a reservation in the traditional sense, but territory acknowledged as theirs by right of continuous occupation. We have paper with white man's words, Standing Elk explained, miming the unfolding of a document. Paper says this land is Jicarilla land. Soldiers respect paper. Elias leaned forward, his interest piqued. A treaty formally ratified. Standing Elk shook his head. Not treaty like big tribes. Smaller paper, local paper. But soldiers and settlers know this land not for taking. Well, it wasn't perfect, certainly not as secure as a congressionally ratified treaty, but it represented exactly the kind of arrangement Elias had hoped might be possible. If the Jicarilla had established such a precedent, perhaps Grey Bear's people could build upon it. The conversation continued late into the night, with the Jicarilla sharing valuable information about the territory that lay ahead, including confirmation that the trading post Elias planned to visit was owned by a man sympathetic to native peoples, having married a Ute woman years earlier. By dawn, a new plan had formed. Standing Elk and one of his companions would guide Grey Bear's band along a safer route that bypassed the trading post entirely, while Elias Najoni and the third Jicarilla, a younger man named Swift Fox, who spoke excellent English, would continue to the trading post as planned. This is better, Grey Bear acknowledged. The children and elders will reach safety sooner while you gather the information we need. As the camp broke and preparations for departure began, Kinalda approached Elias. The young girl had spoken little to him directly during their journey, though he often felt her watchful eyes upon him. You will find what you seek at the trading post, she said cryptically. But danger follows close behind. Trust the fox who runs swift. Before Elias could ask what she meant, she had turned away to help her sister prepare for their separate journeys. The child's enigmatic words stayed with him as he, Najoni, and Swift Fox set out traveling southeast toward the trading post, while the main band continued northeast toward the Jicarilla settlement. Fletcher's trading post occupied a strategic position at the junction of two well-traveled trails in a narrow valley. The main building, a substantial log structure with a covered porch, was flanked by a stable, a small blacksmith's forge, and several storage sheds. A worn sign proclaimed, "Fair trades, fair prices," in faded paint. Elias approached alone, having left Najoni and Swift Fox concealed in the forest a half-mile back. They had agreed that a solitary traveler would attract less attention, and Swift Fox could interpret Elias's findings for Najoni once he returned. The trading post appeared quiet as Elias rode into the dusty yard. A few horses stood hitched to a rail, suggesting customers inside, but there was none of the bustle that might indicate soldiers or a search party. He dismounted, secured his horse, and straightened his trail-worn clothing before ascending the porch steps. Inside the trading post was dim after the bright autumn sunshine. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with the typical assortment of frontier necessities: tools, ammunition, preserved foods, clothing, medicines. A long counter separated the customers from the more valuable goods kept under the proprietor's direct supervision. Three men stood at the far end of the counter, deep in conversation with a fourth, who Elias presumed was Fletcher's himself, a barrel-chested man with a thick gray beard and hands like hams. All four looked up as Elias entered conversation, pausing momentarily before resuming in lower tones. Elias nodded a general greeting and moved to examine some goods, positioning himself to overhear their discussion while appearing absorbed in the price of hunting knives. 3 more companies arrived in Santa Fe yesterday, one man was saying. Locke's brother-in-law pulled strings in Washington. They're determined to find who's responsible. Waste of time and manpower, Fletcher rumbled. Mountains this size, they could search for years and find nothing. They've got Apache scouts, another man countered. Best trackers there are. Scouts from San Carlos, the third added. They say Gray Bear's band is involved somehow. Disappeared from their usual territory around the same time Locke vanished. Elias kept his expression neutral as he moved to examine a display of tobacco. The news confirmed his worst fears. Locke's disappearance had indeed prompted a significant search effort, one that included Apache scouts, who might be able to follow trails that white soldiers would miss. "Afternoon, stranger," Fletcher called, having noticed Elias's continued browsing. "Looking for something particular?" Elias approached the counter, offering a smile he hoped appeared casual. "Just passing through. Need to resupply coffee, ammunition, maybe some jerky for the trail." "Heading north or south?" one of the other men asked, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of a weathered hat. "South," Elias lied smoothly. "Trapping wasn't worth much this season. Heading back to Santa Fe for the winter." The men seemed to accept this, their interest in him fading. Fletcher began assembling Elias's requested supplies, making small talk about the weather and hunting conditions. Elias responded appropriately while continuing to listen for any additional information about the search for Locke. His patience was rewarded when the conversation turned back to recent events. "They're offering a reward now," one man mentioned. $500 for information about Locke, $1,000 for anyone involved in his disappearance. "I heard they found his camp," another added, "up near Pecos. Abandoned in a hurry from the looks of it." "Probably Apache work," the third man said grimly. "Been trouble with them since they started leaving San Carlos." Fletcher grunted noncommittally. Locke wasn't exactly beloved around these parts. Man had a way of making enemies. "Who's still by law's the law," the first man insisted. "Can't have Indians killing white folks no matter the provocation." As the conversation continued, Elias completed his transaction, paying for his supplies, with some of the money he'd carried for his original bounty hunt. Before leaving, he casually inquired about the telegraph office he'd heard might be nearby. "Just behind the blacksmith shop," Fletcher informed him. "Operators usually there till sundown." With a final nod of thanks, Elias gathered his purchases and left the trading post. His mind raced as he secured the supplies to his saddle. The situation was more serious than he'd anticipated. Multiple cavalry companies, Apache scouts, and a substantial reward that would attract bounty hunters throughout the territory. The telegraph office was indeed where Fletcher had indicated, a small separate building with a lightning rod extending from its roof. The operator, a thin young man with wire-framed spectacles, looked up from his equipment as Elias entered. "Need to send a message?" he asked. "Yes," Elias confirmed, taking out paper and pencil. "To Washington." The operator raised an eyebrow. "Long distance, that'll be extra." "I understand." Elias composed his message carefully, addressing it to a former Army colleague who now worked in the Department of the Interior, a man who had shared Elias's disillusionment with frontier policies, but had chosen to work for change from within the system rather than walking away. The message was deliberately vague, mentioning only that Elias had found the situation discussed in previous correspondence, and requesting an urgent meeting at the settlements near the Northern Territorial Line within 3 weeks. He signed it with a code name they had used during their Army days, one his friend would recognize, but others would not. After paying the considerable fee, Elias left the telegraph office and remounted his horse, eager to return to Najoni and Swift Fox with the information he'd gathered. As he turned to leave the trading post grounds, however, a voice called out behind him, "Boone, Elias Boone." Elias froze, then slowly turned in his saddle. One of the men from inside the trading post, the one with the sharp eyes beneath his hat brim, was standing on the porch staring at him with newfound recognition. "Thought you looked familiar," the man continued. "You're that bounty hunter from Santa Fe, the one who was tracking Frank Holloway before he disappeared." His hand moved casually toward the revolver at his hip. "Interesting coincidence, you showing up here just as the search for Locke is getting organized." Elias kept his expression neutral, though his heart raced. "Just passing through, like I said. Holloway's trail went cold weeks ago. Did it now." The man was joined by his 2 companions, both now regarding Elias with open suspicion. "Funny thing, Holloway and Locke both disappeared from the same area around the same time. And now here you are heading south. You claim though your horse's tracks showed you came from that direction." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Elias weighed his options. There were three of them, all armed, and likely Fletcher as well. Fighting would almost certainly mean death, and even if he escaped, the alarm would be raised. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, the sharp-eyed man suggested, his hand now resting openly on his revolver. I'm sure the army officers in Santa Fe would be very interested in what you have to say. Before Elias could respond, a commotion erupted from the stable area, shouts of alarm followed by the thunder of hooves. A small herd of horses burst from the corral, scattering across the trading post grounds in panic. The distraction was momentary but sufficient. Elias spurred his mount, galloping toward the forest edge, as the men on the porch scrambled to control the loose horses and determine the source of the disturbance. A shot rang out behind him, then another, but both went wide. As he reached the tree line, Elias caught a glimpse of Swift Fox slipping away in the opposite direction, a satisfied grin on the Jaicarilla's face. The young man had created the perfect diversion at exactly the right moment. Najoni was waiting where they had agreed, her face tense with concern. Gunshots, she said as Elias dismounted. Trouble. I was recognized, Elias confirmed grimly. They know I was hunting Holloway, and they suspect a connection to Locke's disappearance. Swift Fox appeared moments later, melting out of the forest as silently as he had entered it. They will follow, he said without preamble. But not immediately. The horses will keep them busy for a time. We need to warn the others, Najoni insisted. If they're tracking Apache. Yes, Elias agreed. But first we need to lose whoever comes after us. He turned to Swift Fox. Any suggestions? The young Jicarilla's eyes gleamed with confidence. Many. These are my hunting grounds. I know places where even Apache scouts from San Carlos will lose our trail. They set off immediately, riding hard for the first mile to put distance between themselves and the trading post, then slowing to a pace that allowed Swift Fox to implement his tracking countermeasures. He led them through streams, across rocky outcroppings that held no prints, and through dense pine groves where low branches would brush away any sign of their passage. By nightfall, they had covered significant ground while leaving minimal trail. Swift Fox guided them to a hidden canyon where a small spring provided fresh water and thick undergrowth offered concealment for their camp. No fire tonight, the risk of detection was too great. As they shared a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit, Elias relayed what he had learned at the trading post. Multiple cavalry companies, Apache scouts, bounty hunters, all looking for answers about Locke. And they suspect Gray Bear's band, Najoni added grimly. Yes, but they're looking south toward Pecos and the caves. They don't know about the northern movement, not yet. Swift Fox nodded thoughtfully. This gives us advantage. By the time they change search direction, your people will be with mine behind our boundaries. Will your paper protection be strong enough? Elias asked. Against a force this determined. It has held for 7 winters, the Jicarilla replied, through other storms. And we have friends, the Indian agent, who helped us, settlers who trade fairly with us, even some soldiers who respect the agreement. His expression grew serious. But we must reach the valley quickly before the search extends this far north. They set out before dawn, pushing themselves and their horses to the limits of endurance. Swift Fox led them along hidden trails and game paths that gradually angled northeast, intending to intersect with Gray Bear's route. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed higher into the mountains, the air thinning and cooling with each passing mile. Late in the afternoon of their second day of hard travel, they crested a ridge, and Swift Fox raised a hand for them to halt. Below them stretched a vast valley cradled between towering peaks. A river wound through its center like a silver ribbon, and the shadows of clouds drifted across meadows still green despite the advancing autumn. Shadow of the Eagles, Swift Fox announced with pride. My home. Near the valley's northern end, smoke rose from what appeared to be a substantial settlement, not the temporary camps of nomadic people, but the established dwellings of a community that had put down roots. Even from this distance, Elias could make out cultivated fields, corrals for horses and other livestock, and dozens of structures that blended traditional Apache design with elements borrowed from white settlements. It's beautiful. Najoni breathed, her eyes taking in the valley with wonder. And there, Swift Fox pointed to movement along the valley's eastern edge. Your people arrive also. Sure enough, Gray Bear's band was descending into the valley from another trail, guided by standing elk. Even at this distance, Elias could see the children running ahead in excitement, the burden of constant flight temporarily forgotten in the joy of reaching their destination. As they made their way down into the valley, Swift Fox explained how his people had transformed this once seasonal hunting ground into a permanent home. They maintained their traditional ways while adopting agricultural practices and construction techniques that allowed them to establish a more visible, irrefutable claim to the land. They traded with nearby white settlements, maintained peaceful relations with other tribes in the region, and carefully documented their continuous presence to strengthen their legal position. It is not the old way, he acknowledged, but it is a way that lets us survive in the new world without losing who we are. When they finally reached the settlement, they found Gray Bear's people already being welcomed by the Jacarilla community. Children played together while women exchanged information about medicinal plants and food preparation. Warriors compared weapons and experiences, finding common ground in their shared struggles. At the center of the settlement stood a large structure that combined elements of traditional Apache design with the practicality of a frontier meeting house. Here, Swift Fox explained the community gathered for important decisions, celebrations, and interactions with outside authorities. Inside, they found Gray Bear and the Jicarilla leaders deep in discussion with Kinalda, sitting quietly nearby, occasionally offering a word that caused the adults to pause and reconsider. The young girl's eyes lit up when she saw Elias and Najoni enter. "You found the fox's path," she said, a knowing smile touching her lips, just as the dream showed. Gray Bear turned to them, relief evident on his weathered face. "We feared for you when you did not join us yesterday. We had to take a more circuitous route," Elias explained, before sharing what they had learned at the trading post in their narrow escape. The news of the extensive search for Locke sobered the gathering. While the valley offered temporary safety, it was clear that long-term security would require more than physical distance from their pursuers. "The telegram I sent may help," Elias told them. "If my contact in Washington responds, we could have an advocate with actual authority." "And if he does not," one of the Jicarilla elders asked. "Then we fight with the weapons we have," Elias replied. "Legal documents establish precedent to the visible reality of a peaceful, productive community." He gestured to the settlement around them. "What you've built here is powerful evidence that the old policies are wrong, that Apache people can adapt without being imprisoned on reservations or wiped out by war." The discussion continued into the evening. Strategies proposed and debated, contingencies considered. Throughout it all, Elias was struck by the resilience of these people who had endured so much, yet continued to look forward, to build, to believe in a future worth fighting for. As the meeting concluded, Gray Bear placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, a gesture of trust that would have been unimaginable when they first met. "You have brought us far, Elias Boone, farther than just the distance we have traveled." "I've only begun to repay my debt," Elias replied honestly. The old chief shook his head. "There are no debts between us now, only a path we walk together." Outside the valley lay bathed in moonlight, the surrounding peaks standing like ancient guardians against the star-filled sky. Najoni joined Elias as he stood contemplating the beauty of this place that might, with luck and determination, become a true sanctuary. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I've never seen a more perfect place to start again," he answered. "For all of us." She nodded, understanding the depth behind his simple words. "The journey is not over. The hardest battles may still lie ahead in Washington and courtrooms, in the minds of those who see us only as obstacles to their ambition." "I know," Elias acknowledged, "but for the first time in years, I believe those battles can be won." As if drawn by their conversation, Canalda approached, her young face serious in the moonlight. "The ancestors have shown me more dreams," she said without preamble. "I see papers with important men's names. I see many people coming to learn our ways. I see children, Apache children and white children, growing together." She looked up at Elias with those fathomless eyes. "And I see you standing between two worlds, building bridges instead of walls." The child's vision stirred something profound in Elias's heart. Hope, yes, but also purpose, clearer and stronger than ever before. This was why he had been spared at Sand Creek, why he had found Kinalda at the mission ruins, why all the twisted paths of his life had led him here to this moment, to these people. "If that is the future the ancestors have shown," he said, kneeling to meet the girl's gaze, "then I will do everything in my power to make it real." Kinaalda smiled a simple child's smile that somehow contained wisdom beyond her years. I know, she said. That is why they chose you. She turned and walked back toward the settlement, leaving Elias and Najoni alone beneath the vast canopy of stars. Without words, their hands found each other, fingers intertwining in a gesture that acknowledged the bond that had formed between them, not just two individuals, but two traditions, two ways of seeing the world, finding harmony together. In the days and weeks that followed, Elias's telegram received a response his former colleague would indeed meet with them. The legal battle for recognition began a struggle that would stretch over months and then years, with victories and setbacks, moments of despair and triumph. Through it all, the Apache of Shadow of the Eagles Valley continued to build their community, strengthened now by Gray Bear's people and the unique gifts they brought: Grandmother Reed's wisdom, C's fierce protection, Najoni's diplomatic skill, and Kinaalda's mysterious connection to forces beyond the visible world. And Elias Boone, once a soldier who had helped wage war against these people, found himself transformed into their most effective advocate. His knowledge of the system, his connections to influential figures, and most importantly, his firsthand testimony about the injustices of the reservation system and the remarkable achievements of the Shadow of the Eagles community gradually began to shift perceptions in territorial courts and eventually in Washington itself. The path was not straight or easy. There were those who continued to view all Apache as enemies to be contained or eliminated, those who coveted the valley's resources, those who simply could not accept that Native peoples deserved the same rights and opportunities as white settlers. But with each challenge, the community grew stronger, their legal position more secure. 5 years after their arrival at the valley, Elias stood with Gray Bear Najoni and other community leaders as the territorial governor himself arrived to sign a formal agreement recognizing their right to the land, not as a reservation controlled by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but as a self-governing community with defined boundaries and protections. It wasn't the comprehensive victory they had hoped for, but it was a crucial step forward, a model that other Native communities would later emulate. As the governor and his entourage departed, Elias found himself standing at the edge of the settlement, looking out over the valley that had become his home. So much had changed since that fateful day at the mission ruins when a young Apache girl had asked for his help. He had changed. Najoni joined him, their infant daughter cradled in her arms, a child of two worlds with her mother's copper skin and her father's blue eyes. Behind them, Kinaalda, now a young woman growing into her role as the community's spiritual guide, watched with quiet satisfaction. Was it worth it? Najoni asked, knowing the sacrifices Elias had made, the dangers he had faced, the old life he had left behind forever. Elias looked at his wife, at their daughter, at the thriving community spread before them, Apache and Jicarilla, living together, maintaining their traditions, while adapting to the changing world on their own terms. He thought of the children in the settlement school, learning both the old ways and the new, preparing for a future where they might walk in multiple worlds without losing themselves. More than worth it, he answered, his voice sure and clear in the mountain air. This is what redemption looks like. As the sun began its descent behind the western peaks, casting long shadows across the valley, Elias Boone, former soldier, former bounty hunter, now husband, father, and bridge between worlds, understood that his long journey had not ended, but merely transformed. The road to redemption had no final destination, only a direction, a purpose, and companions to share the path. And that he had learned was enough. Het van 5, Ket Thuk Truyen.